Morning, everybody.
Morning.
So, excuse me, Vice Mayor.
Linda, the meeting started.
Okay, I want to first welcome everybody to our budget workshop. As you know, we're trying to be fluid and flexible during this COVID-19 pandemic. Although I did see in the newspaper that Pinellas County's positivity rate has dropped down to just under 6%. See, it's positive, good news. We'll take it. So we're all spread out, and the council's spread out, and our vice mayor has dialed in. And so let's get the show on the road. The next two items on the agenda is the invocation and pledge of allegiance, which will be led by our city attorney, Mr. Tom Tress. Please rise.
Our Heavenly Father, we come humbly before you to ask your divine guidance and help in our deliberations this morning. Bless the members of this council and the citizens that are present. We pray that our work this morning will find favor in your sight. This we pray.
Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be seated. Next item on the agenda is the Citizens Open Forum. Is there anybody on this side of the room who would like to address the council? Seeing none, I'll move to the other side of the room. Is there anybody? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and on to the next item on the agenda, which is review proposed operational budget for fiscal year 2021 and capital improvement plan for 2020 through 2026. And at this time, I will turn the microphone over to our very capable city manager, Mr. Al Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mayor. Before we start, I have some intro slides that I think frame the conversation and the goals that we need to accomplish today, but I wanted to explain a couple of things about the handouts you have in front of you. Most of you will remember the thickest one was a request by the mayor last year to incorporate a year-over-year decrease percentage from what is now the current year budget figure compared to the city manager's approved budget figure for the upcoming year. So if you wanted to use it as a reference, feel free. It parallels the structure and format of the budget document. At some point, it'll become obvious when you ask a question from it why it's not part of the document, but we'll wait till we get there. This was the mayor's request. It's handy. I use it specifically on categories of expense, personal services in a division year over year. If it looks reasonable with what I've got recommended for raises, I move on, kind of an audit thing. If it looks unreasonable, we go digging. So I find it's most useful when you use it by category. You will see it on each individual set of accounts in this document. So I'm not suggesting you necessarily have to compare, but you can if you want to follow along. If that gives rise to a question, fine.
Just one.
Katie.
Thank you, Mayor. Al, is this versus the 1920 budget as originally approved or as revised? Like
It has to be as revised.
Okay, thank you.
And you just nailed the reason why it's not in the actual document, and I'll get to that when you ask me about one of them, and I'll tell you why it shouldn't be part of the real document, but that's essentially why.
Thank you
It'll become more obvious as you get through it.
Thank you.
Okay, second thing, we had staff prepare a couple of detailed sheets that are from the system for items that we normally have a conversation about. So you have the information on the breakdown. We call it itemized budget because every division is responsible for itemizing every one of their items. So you can see what we're planning on spending on the money in that particular account when that comes up, and obviously you can change it if you so choose. Third thing, did I get these? No. Almost mistaken. I handed you a copy of an email I received from Vice Mayor Norris last night, identifying the pages in the document that she wanted to discuss with council's permission, I'd like to approach the document the way I would normally, which means on a few of those cases, I'm going to be skipping by that number with the promise that at the end of the workshop, we will circle back to any one of those pages that she still has a question on. At the bottom of that email, she kind of said if the questions get answered along the way, so be it. But I'd like to do the presentation the way we've rehearsed it, and then we'll circle back to any page we didn't cover.
All right, so just as a point of reference, we're gonna, at the end, if there's something that the council has a question on, we'll go around so it's not any special treatment for one council member or another. It accomplishes the same thing, I think what you're saying.
That's fine. I mean, and I'm available to answer any questions at any time. I didn't want to necessarily, we've rehearsed this ad nauseum specifically with really the idea of not going over the details of every single page. I have a methodology which I want to go over it to get to the back of the document. And then you guys can decide, you could stop me at any time. And if we happen to hit a page that I am covering that's on Vice Mayor Norris's list, we'll stop and I'll mention that so that you know. If you want, so we'll do it both ways. I just didn't want her to think I was ignoring the list for the page numbers that weren't part of what I thought I was going to present originally.
That's fine.
Okay?
Let's roll.
Thank you. Okay, so away we go with our little presentation for the goals, let's call it, and the assumptions behind this year's operating and capital budget workshop. Council will be reminded that we're not required by charter to have either, to be honest with you. And because of COVID, we skipped the capital budget workshop, which is where we tend to just discuss the capital projects. So, JD, you want to hit that? One of the things that will make this a little bit distinguishable from the normal budget workshop is that we're going to attempt to combine both operating and capital into one. Again, council's pleasure as to how you want to go about that. If you want to have a separate entire session after we're through with the operating and go through the CIP plan, that's fine. The only reason I'm not recommending that is all of the capital information is in the operating and we go by it page by page. So however you want to handle it when the time comes, but our goal, whatever that means time-wise, is to accomplish both in this workshop. Second thing was, stay there. So obviously part of that is discussing staff adjustments made to those items because I believe Councilmember Knapp uncovered it yesterday and I wrote to all of you the biggest thing that this year required that may have never happened before was, well, I'm referring to them as staff adjustments because of COVID. And obviously that process isn't over yet, but that's a common theme and a significant one you'll see over and over again. We're also looking for guidance on the downtown issues. We are going to suggest or recommend at council's pleasure that we have a totally separate workshop for the downtown issues because they're so significant and detailed and require a lot of conversation. Certainly willing to answer any questions raised today, but that would be our recommendation. The fourth item is discuss project timing and priorities. Again, that's kind of related to the second one. A lot of what we had to adjust had more to do with not necessarily eliminating things, but changing the timing or delaying them. And last, and help me for this one, today you will see the spirit of Oldsmar, which actually means my creative staff got bored, and there are 5 pictures of Ari Olds buried in the document somewhere that apparently none of you have seen. And when we trip across them, somebody will wave their hand because I missed them all. And if you'd care to, for a little 1-minute break, they'll show you where the picture is in the document.
Very nice. See, I think next time you should tell us that in advance.
Challenge. Yeah.
I didn't see one of them.
Yeah,
And I'm not sure I saw them.
I didn't
after
look
they
at the
showed it to me.
pictures too much. I can't lie. I was on a plane reading and
The bound document, I don't think is as easily to find them as it will be once they show it to you on the digital. But it's kind of fun.
very creative.
Okay,
Cool.
JD, thanks. All right, so the assumptions for the document in a nutshell. I explained to the council last night that this year, it's presented as a reduction. You got to remember that the budget is a plan. That's all it is. Now, I presented the budget in total with an 18.2 reduction from the revised prior year. Now remember what revisions do. We had an original budget, and we have internal budget revisions, and we have council budget revisions. The internal ones tend to move money around. Take something from one expense to cover another expense, add it here and subtract it there. Zero-sum game. The ones that go in front of council tend to be unappropriated revenues or a revenue source that we didn't expect now being recognized or appropriated to cover an unexpected expense that we didn't expect. So those tend to be bigger ticket items, but they have an effect on what the percentage increases and decreases do, because obviously our actual reduction from the original budget, what I'm presenting here is like 2.2. So really, original to original, I'm presenting you a budget that's 2.2% less. The reason it says 18.2 is because all of the revisions effect on this year, which are legal and have to be in place, make that number a lot higher because of all the revisions we've done, which in large part are capital projects. So that's kind of the way that looks. So 18.2, I wouldn't take that to the bank and say the city thinks we're going to make 18.2% less in revenue. That's not the conclusion to draw, but we'll get into that. The millage rate remains the same for our proposed. You passed at the 21st workshop, the 21st meeting, that we can go no higher than 4.05. But again, with the same theory, we in the past 29 years, we have never raised the millage. This will be the 13th year in a row we've maintained it. I think you'll find we don't necessarily do things because everybody else does them, but I think you'll find it rare for cities in this environment to go after a tax rate increase. I don't think this is the time to do that. We may have to do that in the future. The record may have to come to an end, but not this year as far as my proposal goes. Revenue projections reflecting anticipated COVID-19 effects. That's obvious. And I shared with the council, again, my crack staff, with serious Excel skills. We've been tracking revenues every month with a categorical rating on their sensitivity, which I think is a more depth than most every other city gives to it. But the purpose of that was to try and give us the most recent information to make future projections on, because this is a totally new world. The next bullet item is related, and the most important thing I'm going to say today, assuming anything I say today is important, the impacts of COVID-19 will continue to change. That's important, and here's why. Probably in my 35 years in this business, I've never been in a situation where a budget revision could possibly be negative. And you're going to see the possibility that this year, the best way to give an example of it would simply be to say, when we come to you with budget revisions, if the revenues are not making it, and they're much less than we anticipated with what we've already adjusted, we're going to have to adjust proposed expenditures. So it's possible, we're not planning on it, but it's possible that some of the expenditures will actually be reduced in the budget in one of the 3 council budget revisions. That's what I mean by do not assume that this is a snapshot, but do not assume that we assume that that's all there's going to be. Now, we all love to believe that it could be everything back to normal and everything going, gangbusters like the stock market, which can't make up its mind, but seems to be continually chugging along. And we could be back to normal and no problems. It could also be the other way. Just know that we're still going to monitor this. This is nothing more than a picture of where we are right now or where we think we'll be for the next year. That'll change as we go along. Okay, my personal proposals to you, this is my document after having some intense meetings with my department heads, that I'm not proposing any layoffs. I've discussed this with most of you individually. I think if there's ever been an environment, a time where my employees have more than earned their money, I'd say this is it. So I'm not presenting a budget that suggests we lay anybody off. Now, having said that, we've done this before in 2008 with the recession. I have told my staff, and we've already done this, that just based on, I don't want to call it attrition, we're asking for funding for all of the same positions we normally have. If somebody chooses to leave, which always happens, then we will look, I've told my staff that only I can approve another hire to fill a position that's now vacant. We look at the position and we'll either wait, we're leaving the money in there for the rec, but we may wait a while to hire somebody until we know more about whether or not we'd have to have the money to replace that position. That worked well for us the last time, but in and by itself, I'm not suggesting that we cut any positions. Same thing as far as merit increases in COLA. I'm proposing our normal merit increase, which can be variable, and certainly council can make it whatever they choose, to be 3%, which is kind of our normal. And last year, council was gracious enough to give us a cost of living adjustment, which I'm also proposing at 2%. The operating expenses, you'll notice both in percentage and in flat dollars, continue to be very tight, meaning you will find very rarely increases that aren't distinct for a project or a particular purpose. We operate in an operating expense sense very close to the vest, and every department head must justify every expense of every account to us in the meetings, and we could produce itemized detail on any of those that you need. You'll see it in some of the ones that we tend to talk about. Rolling stock, the other thing I implemented this year, you know I did this 2 years ago, was that I changed our replacement schedule and bumped it out a little bit it was normally 10 years straight up. I made it 12, and the vehicle had to have 50,000 miles on it before we'd consider replacing it. In individual cases, I would entertain issues of replacing something that just had to die. I rely on my fleet people, and Charlie comes and tells us that this vehicle has died. On a case-by-case basis, we will replace things and then adjust them in the budget. But for a theme for this year, in all cases except one, I've pushed back all of our rolling stock that was due to be purchased. And I'll beat you to the punch, because all of you should immediately think, if not say, in that sense, kicking the can down the road is not helping anything, because we're going to have to buy them sometime. I am aware of that. But for initial October 1 purposes, we're delaying it. All I'm trying to do is do what I did before, which is get a little bit more time and a little bit more mileage out of the vehicles we've already got. We will address that as we go along. The one exception I'll explain is in the Public Safety Fund. I'll explain why. Capital projects were delayed to prepare for the effects of COVID-19. That's the essence of the significant dollar amounts that you saw that made up the reduction. And this last one, I think, will come up in conversation, but I think is probably a conversation well suited for an additional workshop, and that is major project affordability. We have some good news in getting grants that relate to projects that are way more expensive than the grants. So council's gonna have to make some tough decisions on that. We got $1 million grant from the state for a project that currently was estimated to cost 6.2. Well, that's nice, but that means we got to come up with the 5.2 as an example. So those are decisions you're going to have to make. You're probably not going to have to make them today, because as you saw yesterday, I bumped a lot of the capital back to splitting some of the things that we can get started on, but saving the whole project cost for another year. And in the one case, the largest of them, I just bumped it out a year because it wouldn't be likely. It's not to say we won't do it. It's just to say we wouldn't likely start it next year anyway. So call it a kick the can mentality to a degree, but I'm not trying to say we're not doing any of those things. Until we know what the unknowns are, it's really difficult to assume that we are doing everything on the normal schedule. JD? Lastly, the assumptions for personnel, as we explained when council approved the renewal, we had budgeted a 5% health insurance increase, which is exactly what it came in at. And we've made no other benefit changes, and there were no other benefit cost increases, which is good news. Bad news, if you want to call it this, is the League of Cities, who has traditionally been our property and liability insurance carrier, has given us a 10% increase, which is not the end of the world, but it's not routine for them. There have been years where we've gotten a premium return in the form of a check that they walk around for feel good in November to say they take the reserves from their experience mod on the property side and give it back to the members. I would doubt that's going to happen this year, because they're obviously anticipating that they're going to need more for their reinsurance and their brokered insurance. So they're passing on the cost to us. You'll see that throughout the document. Solid waste is going to be a big topic. I'm proposing a $2 intensity increase, which sounds mighty specific, and obviously council will make that decision. The reason I'm proposing that is because I anticipate at the end of our contract with Republic, which will be September 30, 2021, we're going to get walloped. If we bid the coverage for solid waste pickup and recycling, I would suggest to you that only low double-digit increases would be great news. And we have a timing example of something that just happened in Hillsborough County. One of the first things Bonnie Wise did when she was named county administrator was she increased the solid waste rates in Hillsborough County 25% on the spot. Now, I'm going to tell you that I think that was actually smart, because if some of you remember from the county level, the TARE rate, the tonnage charge to the waste to energy plant, had been $37.50 for every year since 1978 or whenever it was built, 87. Nobody had the political will to raise it until last year. In the course of a combined task force, which we were a member of, countywide, they increased that rate by 6% for the next 3 years in a row. Now, let's remember what that is. That's the TARE, meaning that's the charge per the tonnage when somebody goes to the dump. So that rate is increasing by 6% this year, next year, the year after that. Now let's translate that. To us, we're in the third year, towards the end of a third year of a 4-year contract with Republic. On the residential side, you could make the argument that until the end of the contract, they're eating it, because they charge us one rate to do the solid waste. So if they have increased costs because they have to pay the TARE for the tonnage, now that you might call that a heck of a recycling incentive, because anything you can keep out of the landfill would save them money on volume, but not our problem financially.
Yeah.
Careful to say that, financially. Okay. Commercial side, we don't have the problem because the way our rates are structured are that on a commercial pickup, we charge for the pickup based on the pull. The TARE is paid by the commercial entity. So whatever the TARE is passes through to the commercial tenant. So right now, the fact that the county has increased those fees and is going to continue to doesn't really have a significant effect on us, but you can bet your bottom dollar that when the contract is over, the next contract, whether it's with Republic or somebody else via bid process, is going to be ugly. And I've been telling you guys this for about 3 years in a row now. Andrew, I remember you mentioning it in one of your campaigns, and it was very intelligently presented. Oh, wait, I said it. No, the way you presented it was exactly the way it needed to be said. It's nobody's fault. Now you add the recycling problems to that, and that's my attempt to tie this back to us. We currently charge residential customers $18 a month. Okay, that gives us some little bit of profit. That includes us paying for recycling. You know what we have single stream. Just a point of clarity, every account, whether you use it or not, has to pay it, which means we have to pay it for 4,800 and for whatever the 4,800 accounts we have. We pay $2.10 for every account for recycling, whether they use it or not. Now, we've seen, because this crescendo or decrescendo has occurred, Safety Harbor Council last year initially stopped doing recycling altogether and then changed their minds. It's probably because of public backlash, which is fine. My point in mentioning it was the financial metrics are getting so bad with recycling that when you layer on top of that the reality, I'm big on reality, that the haulers, if you won't get them to say it in front of an audience, but you'll get them to say it in a meeting, still will check a spot market for a recycled good. And if the spot market doesn't allow them to make money on it, it goes in the trash. Now, they may be trying a heck of a lot harder now because the TARE is increasing almost exponentially by multiples of 6. So what I'm trying to do here is say, look, if we have to prepare ourselves for the reality that when the next contract is up, October 1st, 2021, our solid waste rates and whatever we do with recycling are going to be a lot higher, and I mean a lot higher, then I want to pull the 210 out that we currently pay for out of the 18, still charge 18, charge the customer 210 so they see, because we have some people that religiously recycle, some people that don't, that they see that they're going to have to pay for recycling. That's a charge. Now, in effect, that's a $2.10 increase to the whole thing, but I'm suggesting that the cost of both of these, if we maintain both services, is going to be so much higher that the $2 we get this year will actually help a little with the pain of what's likely to happen next year. So that's my recommendation. We'll talk about it when we get to solid waste. If you want, if council, if it pleases council, we could also make that a topic of conversation at a subsequent workshop, as long as it was in time to finalize the budget. But that's what's in the budget, okay? So we have no rate increases proposed for water or sewer. We have no rate increases proposed for stormwater. I mentioned briefly before, we need a discussion on grant funding versus project cost. That might be another one for a workshop, but that's a factor for us. I stole this one from something I read. This is an interesting kind of way to piece it all together. We're in an increased debt and reduced revenue environment. That's generally bad news. Just by virtue of the fact that we happen to take on $6 million of debt for the Harbor Palms project, well, we're now in an increased debt position at the same time, as luck would not have it, in an environment where we're probably going to get reduced revenue. It's not bad in the sense that the roof is caving in. Don't get me wrong, we're fine. I just say, as an overall arching theme to say that, well, that's true. If you have more out the window or out the door to pay bills that you need to, well, having less money to do it is generally not good news. We're nowhere near any trouble. We're fine. I just think that's a good way to capsulize it. And the last thing that I think most of you noticed was I do have BMX track funding in place. There's $1 million in place in the budget. Now, as all of you know, we don't know what the bill is going to be, but we have some alternatives there, and right now, that's my best guess. So that'll be another one of those things that'll change as we know more. The BMX bid will be on the street Friday, finally, and we'll probably November or December, you guys will be asked to make a decision, because we'll have costs. Hopefully we'll have a lot of bidders, and you guys will make a decision on which one we're picking. We're trying to combine both the bidders, somebody to bid on it in its current and original form, because we actually need that as a basis for damages in the lawsuit. But we also want to encourage people to bid it with alternative possibilities. We talked about scaffolding, we talked about concrete pillars, so that if cost is unmanageable, we could decide to fix it, but fix it a different way. That's the plan, that's the game plan, okay? Bless you.
Thank you.
JD, we finished? One more. Future considerations. Consider a separate work session. We talked about that. That's council's pleasure, just a recommendation. Lasting impacts of COVID, we already talked about that. The CRA expiration is not something we had to deal with now, but everybody's got to know. 2026 is the end of the CRA agreement, ordinance. I wouldn't say it's likely that the county would be entertaining renewals for it, but that doesn't mean we're not going to try. So it's not going to be a factor probably this year or next year, but we've already started discussions with the county on the possibility of what would it take for us to try and get it renewed for another 30 or anything else when we get to that point. Just know that it's out there. It does affect possibly the out years of the capital, right? Because that goes out that far. Secession planning. We always talk about succession planning in our strategic plans. This year, the focus is on planning and redevelopment, because Marie is leaving us after 900 years? Marie has given us great service for 33 years, and she's retiring December 31st. So we're going to have the wickedest social distance party ever. Yeah. But obviously, the funding is in the budget for her position for the entire year. I will present to you what my thoughts are on how we're going to proceed once I've concluded what we're going to do. That won't be part of this workshop, but it's a point of consideration for future reference. Okay, imminent solid waste recycling fee increases we talked about, monitor COVID-19 effects on revenues, which we will continue to do, and the garage, Oldsmar Town Center funding and debt repayment will be another topic of conversation, probably for pieces here, and then maybe for an entire workshop down the road if council wants that. All right, so that's the framework. As far as the document goes, I'm going to present the general fund, and then Cindy's going to present the special revenue funds and 401, and depending on council pleasure, I'm hoping that the questions required to cover the capital items will be covered as we go along, because the capital is part of the operating budget page. So if you feel at the end of it that you either want to have a separate section on pages, I think it's 200, 191 and beyond, we can do that. A lot of that should be redundant in that we will have already talked about a lot of what's happened when we went through the particular fund or the particular division where the capital expense resides.
Yeah, and as a point of reference, in the past, what we've always done is we've gone and done them both separately. But I think it makes sense that while we're on a particular category, that it's the appropriate time to get into the discussion on any capital improvement requirements. And what we can do is when we're done going through the budget, could simply ask, is there anything that somebody would like to ask a question on the capital improvement framework period? Because sometimes it's a question on timing, whether it should be pushed out further, whether, you know.
Perfect.
And you need that document to show how far out. The winner's in year 6. Hello? Hello?
Okay,
Far away?
so if everybody's ready, we're going to the book, and we'll thumb through a few pages with apologies to the vice mayor. I wasn't planning on stopping on pages 10 or 12, but I promise we'll come back to those. If somebody had a specific question, then we'll open it up, because we know the vice mayor does. The budget message is kind of a lot of what I've just mentioned, with a few more specifics about numbers and the, let's say, the narrative descriptions of the projects. So between 10, 12, and 15, I would say we'll follow back up with that with any specific questions, but I think we'll cover most of it on the actual number pages. So then we keep going. You'll see on page 18, we have a recap of the strategic vision and mission statements. And I think I gave the cheerleader speech before, but this is the best graphic document I've ever seen, thanks to my creative people that get bored and put pictures of Ari Olds and pictures, because this wasn't enough.
They make budgets fun.
It is, they do make it fun. And it was a great idea. I can't even tell you I remember who had it, but I suspect it was one of you guys. A few years ago, we made a contest out of the public submitting pictures, which we give prizes for and are in the document, which I think was another great touch. So I'm moving on the pictures. I'm going by pages 20, 21. 23 is a description kind of Oldsmar history. I think you'd find a lot of that is the same as it was last year, not a whole lot of new history. And then page 26, the community profile, kind of a statistical way to look at things you might want to say at social events to break the ice at parties, our population, how many accounts we have, how many parks we have. Thank you for laughing. Somebody laughed. Thank you. Thank you. I was wondering, is this on? Is this on? Thank you. So, and then the economics of it, sometimes good to know who our principal employers are, especially with taxes. And then we get into the actual budget process, moving on to pages 28, 29. And the budget process, this is actually one of the reasons we get the GFOA award, because the GFOA takes this really seriously, that the budget is a communications document. So the actual financial policies have to be a part of it, and the budget calendar has to be a part of it. So you could for those of you that absorb like sponges, you could really learn a boatload about what goes on here, reading the budget, and if you were really a glutton for punishment, the CAFR, because that's where everything that's required to be presented, it's there. If you have a few years to read, you're in good shape. All right, page 32 is more policies. Page 33, do we get to the first Spirit one? Okay, somebody got to kick me. All right, 34, and then 35, we had the funds description, just kind of, again, it's required by GFOA to outline what kind of funds we have, how many, what they do. And then the first page I really wanted to start with any kind of discussion on was 37, although I think it's pretty much familiar to all of you, that being the Citywide Org Chart. So what you see is pretty much exactly what we've had last year. And if anybody has any questions of that, I'd be glad to field them, but that's kind of the way we're structured. Are you yawning, or did you have a question?
Perhaps you could talk more about the human resources pull out from administrative services when we get to that.
Absolutely. I had a feeling I was going to have to defend it because my division is the one that has the largest increase,
Indeed.
which I know you all noticed.
Well, we figured out why, though, so you're probably not.
Thank
gonna
you
hear a
for
lot
saying
about
that,
it.
yeah.
I mean,
You were the one who was going to notice before anybody, so thank you for noticing that, or concluding that. Okay. So again, more just financial information. Page 38, the Department of the Fund Relationship, that's required by GFOA, just tells you where the division is, what the division is named, and if a particular function exists in more than one fund. Best example is fire rescue. You can see it's Division 132. It exists in the general fund. It also exists in another fund, that being the Public Safety Fund, where we have funding placed in there from ad valorem to use for capital budget items. So it just tells you if there's more than one place to find a particular set of funding. Then the budget guide continues on 39. This is revenue forecast methodology. This isn't real scientific. I would tell you that my 35 years of this have served me better in revenue forecasting methodology, and I'm pretty sure that with COVID, you can throw all that out. Some of this, when you hear us say historical trend analysis, that's a fancy way of saying we're guessing based on what we usually get. But, you know, in normal times, you can usually make a pretty good guess. Now, we also have some help from the state. The state does some revenue projection, which tends to be overly optimistic. Yes. Like way overly optimistic. And the penny for Pinellas, which you could understand the theory behind that. Traditionally, the penny for Pinellas, because there's always a public relations campaign about wanting to get it passed, is, how can I be polite, really overly optimistic. Like they usually project the 10 years of take for each of the cities, and usually it's never anywhere close to that. It's, you know, trying to shovel the good news. Okay, so moving on, we've got the budget guide, which again just tells the methodology of how we go about predicting revenues based on the fund or the actual revenue source. And then an important page is page 42, where our debt outstanding is. First and foremost, our outstanding debt as of 9/30/19 was $488 per capita, which is among the lowest of any city in the state, period. You don't generally get the comparisons against all states, although I'm sure we could do that as a research project. You get them by states in your category. But for our category, that's extremely low, even with the new debt we've taken on. And the other thing that you always want to stay away from with the debt picture is you never, if you have GO debt, general obligation debt, meaning debt that required taxing authority or taxing the citizens to pay for, that's generally bad. If you ever hear pension obligation bonds, I think I said buns, excuse me. Pension obligation bonds, I think you'll find generally are really bad, because it's like saying, well, we can't meet our pension obligations, so we have to borrow money in order to do that. You'll never see that here. Bruce never would have, we didn't have to, we were structured, you know, conservatively, we didn't have to, and we will never have GO debt. If we have to have GO debt, we're in trouble, But that would require a referendum anyway, and it's not something we were able to go to. So all with this, while this looks like a lot of money and more money than we usually have, look at the first one is the SunTrust refunded revenue note, which represented the last couple of payments for Veterans Park, which we purchased for $2 million in '02. So that's almost done. So that'll fall off. I think you got this one and two more. 2022, it'll be gone. The next three belong to the revenue, the enterprise fund. One was for the water booster station, the tank on Commerce. The second and third ones were for the RO plant. So all those, the water booster station will also go away in 2022. So we're almost done with that. Both the two SRF loans for the water supply will be around till 2032. And the one on the bottom is the one we just took for Harbor Palms. So we're still in really good shape. It's not a bad thing. It's increased from last year, but we're still in great shape. Okay. Page 43, we're actually getting into the summaries now. So page 45, which is compiled by Amy, is actually pretty close, if not exact, to what you'll see in the newspaper for the budget summary ad. Now, obviously, it would change based on what you guys may change in it, but this is the format that the trim manual requires to put in the ad. You'll usually see, depending on how much your expenditures are compared to last year, sometimes you have to say that in the header, but you have to have like a quarter-page ad that says, notice of tax increase. Well, wait, we didn't increase taxes. Well, you didn't increase the rate, but if the values go up, that's still a rate increase, that's still a levy increase because people still pay more taxes. It's an attempt by the State Department of Revenue to tell the truth. It confuses more people than it teaches, but it still works well. This is a really excellent way to look at everything just the way you'll see it on the paper. And it'll be in the paper somewhere around September 10th to 12th, usually, between first and second hearing. Okay, page 46. Really good look at the expenditure summaries and comparative year to year by fund. What I presented you went all the way down to the account level, the one you had in your handouts. But by fund, you'll see general funds slightly down, almost all funds slightly down. In fact, all of them except the solid waste fund is significantly down. Again, remember that's when compared to the revised budget for this year. The actual amount to the original is slightly less, but when you compare it to the revised, it's a lot more significant.
Al,
Yes, sir.
I have a question on the CRA. Is the reason that it doesn't appear there's any revenues or minimal expense, I should say, well, there's some expense in there, in that fund is relevant to wanting to do a workshop for downtown? Because I noticed the money that we would anticipate while we don't have a signed contract from the sale of the 1 acre to Simone, not in here, right?
Correct.
Okay.
We would handle that with a budget revision. It was probably just more wanting to be super conservative in that sense, but you're right. I mean, there's no reason why that won't happen. So it was just being overly conservative. And that's something we could change. I mean, if council says, go ahead and assume we're going to make, and I think that's actually a fair assumption, but we can talk more about that when we get to the page. But to that specific point, I agree with you. I don't think there's any reason we couldn't have assumed that will happen next year. Well, it could even happen this year.
Well, and it might be best left for a workshop specifically.
Okay,
downtown.
yeah.
Maybe if everyone agrees with that.
Yeah.
I'd love to tell you that I thought about it, and that my formula answer was it could have been this year.
Right.
I didn't think about it, but that was,
That-
now
well,
that
I
I'm thinking
appreciate-
about it, I could have said that.
Right, but you didn't say that, but you said it after the fact anyhow.
You're
so
right.
We appreciate that.
Yeah, you're right. But if you want to, however you want to handle that is fine. That would be the only piece of all those decisions we got to make that I would be willing to bank on. But I think I just got overly into the whole thing and said, let's just put everything on hold and let
Maybe
that
even
play
from a
out.
negotiation standpoint, it's best not to have it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, we don't have a signed agreement, and generally you don't want to do that unless you have a signed agreement, so you could make that point, but I didn't think of that either.
Well, it's even like putting $1 million in there for the BMX track. We're putting it out on bid, so.
Hey, are we recording?
I'm sure it's going to be less than that, you know.
Okay. All right, so page 47 is a different way to look at the expenditures. This one I love, and I think it's really important. If you compare it to page 7, there's a pie chart, which actually I think really takes this data and outlines the percentage of each type of expense, or in this case, expenditure, of the pie, of the whole pie, okay? So in my world, being from the finance side, the balance associated with the three big categories, that being personal services, operating, and capital, shows strength. And traditionally, we are very strong because we're normally pretty close to level between those three. And in this year, again, we're 31% personal services, 29% operating, 29% capital. So that's something that I do, because obviously these are things I'm proposing, to keep that balance. 30, because you have reserves, and obviously you'll see our reserves have been cut way down because of circumstance, but I like to try and keep those three categories about the same. Personal services kind of happens to you depending on what you pay everybody or whether you do layoffs. Operating, there's no room. We operate tight as we can operate. We make everybody justify every expense, and finance is a bigger pain than they've ever been. Just ask any of the other department heads. But they're that good at it, they have to justify everything they spend. Capital is where you'll see most of the flexibility and most of what we're going to talk about delaying, with the possibility of addressing that at a workshop. All right, so 31, 29, 29, obviously debt service you can see went up, and the transfers slightly up, and the reserves slightly down. But that's a picture of the whole pie, all funds, by category and kind of a percentage basis. Okay, page 48. This is all funds revenue with a little bit more breakdown, and a lot of guesswork here. Remember the themes, and the ad valorem, while we may have been teased into patting ourselves on the back because the ad valorem rate increase on the estimate was pretty normally positive. I say, be cautious of that, because the translation as to whether or not that ends up being that way probably has more to do with whether there are foreclosures picking up, because the levy just means we anticipated the values, which right now in my neighborhood, it's more than true, because people either are paying more attention to the value of their homes because they can't leave their homes or don't want to. And it seems to be true. But as the economics of what happens because of COVID, if it continues to deteriorate, the proof is in the pudding. We normally get the meat chunk of our ad valorem in December and January. So by December and January, the people that take advantage of the discount, either paying through the mortgage or paying by November 1st, that's why the big money comes in then. So that'll be our first sign as to whether or not the 6% stated increase is really translating. We'll then go back down another year or another half year, and you'll see what we've talked about before, the possibility that the real effect on real estate may not be happening for another year or two. So the reason we budget with the numbers as if nothing's wrong is really the law. The law says, and the theory behind this is, as an old basketball coach, sandbagging comes natural to most of us. The real reason you have to budget 95% of your ad valorem tax revenues, whatever you expect the levy to be, based on the estimate that the county gives you, times the rate that you charge, you have to, by law, budget 95% of that number. You can't sandbag it. So being overly conservative with all the rest of them, where we say anything sales tax related, we might say we're really going to get killed, and we lower that and we lower that, maybe even to be accused of trying to make up the difference. You can't do it with ad valorem taxes by law. So that's a little dangerous, because if it turns out the receipts aren't there, well, then that could be a problem. We don't anticipate it being a problem that's of major significance, but since that's the number one revenue source we have in terms of dollar amount significance, it's obviously pretty important to keep track of it. So what you'll see here is, it looks like a regular year, 6.6% increase. Hope that's true. Could be more, because so far the initial reaction seems to be people are really buying up houses even more so. Wait and see. You'll see the others thematically. We've done a lot more in reducing those, specifically those that are related to sales taxes. Because anything related to the economy, if the economy takes a hit, we get a percentage of, the percentage is likely to be less, so it translates. We did, as I told you before, try and evaluate the sensitivity of every single revenue account in the profile for what we considered to be those that would be hit the worst, to those that would be hit the least, to those that we would know exactly how much they would be hit. So I'm pretty comfortable that our projection here is decent, but going back to the part about the possibility that that could continually change, I hope it changes for the better, but it could deteriorate. We don't know. So in this particular case, this is every revenue by category for the entire budget. If anybody has any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Otherwise, we'll move on.
Anyone got any questions?
Mine was generally answered. I just had a question about the building permits, local business tax receipts, but in general, as you explained, anything tied to an economic factor is kind of an unknown, so conservative.
Have we seen any trend so far as it relates to building permits in terms of a decrease in demand?
Not activity-wise, we have obviously not as many people coming in, but we have a way they can do business. And I think it's too early to tell for the grand scheme of things. What was the sensitivity? Those were ultra sensitive. So we projected 30% reduction. Our categorical approach to that was the high sensitivity stuff we assumed was going to be a 30% reduction.
Okay.
So for the future year, the 4 or 5 budget categories, building, electrical, mechanical, we projected a 30% reduction. I don't think it's materialized yet, but we're guessing it's going to be a bit worse. Marie, you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, really, it was like smaller projects, homeowners doing improvement additions, et cetera. And then we do have some medium and some larger projects. We've talked to a lot of people, so maybe they're not in yet. But.
And then once again, in the area of impact fees and assessments, I'm assuming we're not looking at anything related to downtown.
Got too much conjecture right now.
You know, and I don't think there's anything wrong with us going in this real conservative, because I know there's some issues laying out there that nobody really knows what they are yet. And so I think for this council, it's going to be extremely important in terms of making adjustments to the budget as we find more and more stuff out. So, to your point.
Yeah.
Okay. So moving on, page 51, we're now in the general fund specifically. This is an expenditure look by division for each division, and you'll see the percentage increase with my division leading the pack, unfortunately. Couldn't get out of that. So
I have a question. When you put in a request, do you deny anything in yours?
never. It's a zero-sum game.
Is there actual
Whatever I
conversation?
deny for somebody else, I put a little plus in my column.
I see. Okay. We all know how this works now. All right.
All right, so we'll get into the details of this because I know I'm going to get hammered, but this particular is a snapshot of all the divisions in the manager-approved budget against the current year revised budget. All right, moving on. So another look at the general fund specifically by category, and I like to do that same thing, and my staff gave it to me if I can see it. So what you'll notice in the general fund by category, or the personal services percentage of the whole, is a little higher. So that's part of the entire picture where the balance is, but because the capital for general fund rarely has a boatload in it, you see less than $500,000. So you can see why that almost skews the percentage of the pie that goes to the personal services. It's where most of the people are budgeted, where the least of the capital is budgeted. So that's why it comes out that way. But the breakdown was 56 for personal services, 35 for operating, and 3 for capital. But that's incorporated into the other bigger pie where it's 31, 29, 29. Okay, any questions there? Page 53. is the additional breakdown on the revenues just for general fund. You'll see the increase in ad valorem, which we talked about. You'll see a significant decrease projected for building permits and sales tax related items. But again, I go back to the part about changing on the fly. As we know more, the budget revisions for the year coming will be very, very important because we'll be making likely adjustments 3 times. Any questions?
Can you tell me about the 303% increase in the violation of local ordinances for 2019-20? About midway through the page?
That's probably Tom, having negotiated a few settlements on outstanding abatements or liens.
That's right, I remember.
So we
when
don't
you-
generally always,
Okay.
we book them, but we don't generally always budget them. So
Okay,
if
so
Tom
now-
got a few settlements on things, that makes us look good. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
All right, any other questions? Moving on. City Council, page 55, see the org chart, service program goals and objectives. Page 56 is the expenditures by category. Page 57, you can see the expenditures by total personal services. And our first probably conversation, depending on council's pleasure, would be the normal conversation we have on aid to government and private agencies. You should have a handout in front of you with the breakdown. Mayor, is that something you guys wanted to talk about? I think we have somebody in the audience.
I don't know if there's any discussion about it. Councilmember Gannon?
Just one quick question is if there was any change from last year to this year?
Budget, no. Reality, yes. Last year, or I guess it was last year, we gave $10,000 to both the elementary schools
Right,
for
I
a program, so we ended up spending 85.
Okay.
And there was another little thing. What was that? Who? The Warrior Run. Oh, and the Warrior Games.
Oh, yeah.
So that wasn't budgeted because that's not recurring, and the schools didn't make any requests, so we didn't budget any.
But as far as the amounts that are allocated here in 20/21.
Correct.
They're the
I mean,
same.
I remember Oldsmar Cares and Maddie Williams was always 25 for the past couple of years, but the others, I couldn't recall if they were exactly the same.
Those are the same, I believe.
Yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
No, Mayor.
I don't think there's any other action.
I do have a question, if y'all can hear me.
Sure, Vice Mayor.
Okay, I'll address my main question about the aid to government, and private agencies, and you said that it was in the handout, so I would like to request, I need to get those handouts. And then if you don't mind, I didn't realize I was the one that was supposed to go back, I was the one that was supposed to unmute, I won't make that mistake again. Al has answered most of my questions on many of these pages, but if y'all will give me the courtesy of just going back to page 48, because I didn't realize I was going to have to unmute. May I do that? May I ask a quick question on page 48, please?
Sure. Go right ahead. Can you put the microphone over there closer? It might be easier to
Now,
hear.
the federal grants and the state grants, I know it's kind of been a trend throughout the entire budget that they are way, way down. And my only question is that due to COVID?
No, that's due to timing. We have
Timing.
budgeted, we haven't walked away from any grant that we've already been awarded, but the budget is generally trying to present the year we hope to receive it. So in cases, we might have to rebudget the same amount if it was something like the state appropriation we got that we didn't get yet. And in other cases, we have already got a piece of it, so we can't budget it again. So no, I don't think that's got anything to do with COVID. If there's a reduction in grants to be had, I don't know that, I think that's hit us yet, but I'm not aware of it. In fact, I think we've been awarded 2 grants in the past a couple of months, right?
Okay. And then the only other thing, I think that it will be simpler and less annoying for folks if the questions that I have on the previous pages, if I just meet with you or call you at a separate time and just ask you all my quick questions I have on those other pages. Do you suggest that?
I think that'd probably be a good idea. You know, as you can tell, we're all kind of rolling through it, and I think a lot of our questions probably have been answered in the course of the presentation, as well as maybe even beforehand where we wanted something. So I think it's probably a good idea.
Yeah, I agree. No, Al's covering a lot of them. Okay, thank you very much, guys. I'm going back on mute.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I'm on page 58. And if you want to skip straight through to 62, I'd be happy to. Dang it. Okay. So here's where a couple of things have occurred. I made it clear to department directors at the outset of the budget that I was only considering one promotion. Normally, as you might imagine, the department meetings are wonderful exercises of how I get to say no to the thousands of things that my department heads want to do for their brilliant department people. And this year is no different, but I told them not to do it anyway because it wasn't that I necessarily anticipated COVID, but that kind of made the no part easy because I didn't anticipate there was going to be much of anything that we were going to expand on, and I like to tie these to things that actually people do more than they used to do or required to do more. So all the way back to probably March, it's been my personal opinion in my career that an organization works far more efficiently if human resources is independent of anybody but, in this case, myself and Felicia. And that's not a knock on any of her bosses, and it's not a knock on her at all, because frankly, and you saw an example of it, the work that took to get 2 personnel manual changes of significance in front of you in 6 months, that doesn't happen, ever. I did one of them in 10 years as Director of Administrative Services. Now, part of it, it goes to the back of the pile. We take the rules we have in place and deal with them. But I had long wanted to do this and make HR independent, meaning make the position of department head. And Michelle just made it easy because she's wonderfully professional. The skill level of the position, without commenting on any of her predecessors, has skyrocketed. And she's the first person I've ever worked for, and this is going to sound arrogant, and I apologize ahead of time, but I was the de facto personnel director for the city of Madeira Beach for 12 years, and I had never come across anybody in any city other than Largo, where they had 10 people, and Clearwater, where they had 10 people, that knew more about the governmental environment on benefits and HR than I did. And she makes me look like an idiot. So she proved to me instantly and quickly, way before any of this happened, that I'd really like to make her a department head. Those of you that have been around for a while, we've had some political nonsense with some things that happened in the personnel situation because that position answered directly to, at the time, what would have been me or my predecessor. And I think this organization functions much better because A, I can trust her, B, she knows everything that she needs to know. She's a great workhorse, and even though those are reasons for the person, the position, in my opinion, really needs to be independent. So currently, she's a member of Administrative Services. Her direct report is to Cindy, the Director of Administrative Services. She has a role in payroll, she has a role in budget, she has a role in benefits administration that are all finance related. That will still be true, because part of segregation of duties requires that, but I think she's more than proven. We've gotten so much more done with her that the other thing that happened, that's a cost escalator, is we asked permission in the June budget revision to make the HR technician a full-time position. That's another thing I've wanted for years. Now, the reason we couldn't do that one had more to do with the fact that the person we wanted in it, who is Jen Tessanero, the one we have, couldn't do it. She couldn't work full-time. Well, she came along and took everybody by storm, and now we're doing a whole lot more in HR. We asked Jen, we really need this. In fact, Felicia and I have one part-time administrative assistant. If that part-time assistant ever retired, I'd be asking for a full-time assistant. And that's one person to serve both she and I. So from the budget standpoint, what happened here was, in the middle of this year, that specifically actually being the June budget revision, we added money to turn a part-time position into a full-time position, that being Jen's. You approved it in the June budget revision. From the budget column standpoint, think of what happened. We added a quarter of the year's money for a position that's now full-time. So this year's budget has a full year's money, which is one of the reasons that increase looks so ridiculous. The other is I stole Michelle from that position out of administrative services over to city manager. So in essence, I've taken on 2 new full-time positions in my budget, and that's why the personal service number is blown out or looks blown out. Any questions?
I just had one comment that from the get-go, I actually never quite understood why human resources wasn't a separate department head. And I am actually really pleased to see it pulled out, not just because this particular person is fantastic, but because for practical reasons, it makes sense to me to be a separate department head. But
Yeah, and I think we have enough, our staff size would justify it. I mean, we're right at that
honestly,
size.
I mean, any
We're about-
organization of this magnitude, you will find HR as its own,
I wouldn't have recommended it if it hadn't been for Michelle, but it's exactly what I was looking for. I was looking for somebody that had the skill set that it said, I know I could let them make independent decisions because of their knowledge and experience in the government environment. And she's the first person since I've been here that I felt had that skill set.
So some of the duties will be maintained with administrative services like payroll you mentioned, but the reporting is to you now
Directly
as
Felicia
opposed
and
to-
I.
Okay, as opposed to Cindy.
Yeah,
Okay.
and logistically, she's right there anyway.
Yeah,
But
literally.
it's one less step in the process,
To get-
since I tend to get involved in probably more of those things than I should anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we're better suited with that level of independence,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why I'm recommending it.
All right, do we have any more questions, comments? The only question I have, which will answer it for quite a few, is, can you explain to me special pay?
Okay, special pay is a couple of things. We have a Christmas bonus that we give to employees each year of $100, and I think $50 for part-time. And then we have service awards. If somebody reaches a 5-year service milestone, 10-year, 15, 20. So that tends to go all over the map because, you make the 5 and then you don't get anything for another 5. So it's those 2 things. Anything else? Who? Oh, yeah, the sick payout. The sick payout is tougher to predict. We do predict it and we budget for it, but that tends to change because we might project something and then you use some sick leave and you don't get as much. So that makes it a little bit more difficult to nail on the budget side.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the operating expenses, which you'll also notice increased significantly, I swear it's not my fault. I did have, in your handout, also the second page was the breakdown of the expenses that belong to human resources that I took and removed from administrative services, which amount to about $16,000 of the $18,000 increase.
Got it.
So if no other questions?
I have a question, please.
Vice Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. On page 61, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay, I'm just curious, and I've noticed it throughout as well on a couple of other departments, a difference between a large ask, and I was just wondering on education and training, the ask was $9,500 and it was approved $5,000. Are the asks for these things because we're making up for lost time because of COVID and we can't do anything, or is it just that it wasn't determined that it was important?
Well, since this particular one is my division, it's proof that I say no to myself on occasion. But to your point,
Are you serious?
You actually submit, I want
I did.
9,500?
I did. So,
Oh my God, that's
partially,
hilarious. Okay, thank you.
okay, moving on. Page 62 and 63 give us the personnel and the org chart for the clerk's office. Page 64, the category of expenditures. She's got a whopping increase too.
Sorry.
Okay. So one thing we did here on personal services, which represents the increases, we did allow one of her part-time staff to increase their hours by 5 per week. So that justified the year-over-year increase categorically was 7, and normally I would say 5 to me would be acceptable, move on. The extra 2 was we allowed one of her part-timers to work 5 hours more per week.
Very good. Any other questions? I have one. I'm just curious, what are contractual services? I know I should probably know the answer to this, but I just,
It's in most of the different departments, yeah, other
It's, in this case, this year it's MuniCode. We have a MuniCode project scheduled, which is why that increase is so significant. There is an itemized budget on it. What else is in there? Is that elections? Angela?
Yeah, so the other contractual services that include the supervisor of elections for the election, and then the codifications of all the ordinances from the ordinance review committee that, may have to be happening.
good. We could probably cut those elections, don't you think?
There's a $10,000 MuniCode project that needs to be done. That's part of that.
Thank you, sir.
All right, moving on. Legal. So, sorry, I blew over the pages 66 and 67. Nice pictures. We still haven't hit one of those? Okay. All right, so 68 is categoric. Obviously, we have a contract legal relationship with Tom and several other firms. We have a pension attorney, we have a labor attorney. We happen to have a construction attorney for the BMX case. So in this particular case, the total of professional services, and John has put up the breakdown there, and there is also one in your handout. Tom is still the bargain of the century, even with an increased retainer. The monthly billings estimate was partially because some of the side work that we may pay him for, he has not been as much as it had been in some years. So in grand total of the two, he's still a pretty good bargain. The lobbyist is also in there. You notice we're not paying the full boat for that. I still maintain, and I was the hardest sell on agreeing to go with the lobbyist. The part of what the lobbyist is still doing for us that has value to me and may not to the raw eye is they have tremendous relationships with state agencies. And I only wish their juice with CSX as a federal, it's actually a private corporation, was as significant, because every time we call them for something related to DOT or a state agency, they're on it and it gets done. They really, so okay, in the 3 years we've had a relationship with them that's contractual, we only got money in 1 year, which certainly has been way more than we've paid them, but they continue to do some good things for us. So I would still propose that we maintain them in the particular situation. They have a lot of connections and they do care about us. And as I think most of you know, you don't call the office and hope to get word to them. You call Alan or RJ and you get Alan or RJ. I think there's a lot of value to that. And back in the day, in the early day, we had both a federal and state lobbyist, and we didn't get anything out of either one of them. So I think this is money well spent.
Great.
Okay. Questions?
Thank you, Mayor. I just had one quick question. Why the decrease in legal services request of about $50,000 from 1920 to 2021?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
So if you look at this particular page, you notice in fiscal year 1920, the request was 300,000.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
budget was 300,000.
Well, we weren't paying the lobbyist the full boat. We were paying him
right,
about
we
half of
gave
that.
him the discount,
And
right.
Tom has kept it tight. In other words, the retainer stuff, we pay him every month, but this other stuff we have to pay him for, we use kind of historical look at that. And that has not been, don't get any ideas. That has not been a highly significant amount. So we got a chance to reduce a little, but predominantly that was because of the lobbyist.
I think there was also the question of whether or not, with the mayor at the time, whether we needed to budget more legal fees.
Of course.
And there's actually, I'm sorry, there's another thing, Kate. The other thing is the construction attorney, because the chances are the construction attorney, that's not going to be the end of it for him.
Right.
That's a guess right now. So it's probably a combination of the construction attorney and the difference between what we were paying the lobbyist this year and what we will pay them next year.
Because last year it was 300,000 ask, and this year it's recommended 257. So I was like, wow, 50 grand for less for the attorneys is.
Yeah, well, we
not the
did, I
case.
think we also cut the pension attorney, we had a little bit more in there, but we don't really have the need. That's just kind of in case we have like an actuarial evaluation or a study we have to do. And the labor attorney, I think we cut that a little bit as well.
I just got to check up on my attorneys, you know.
Good point. Always a good thing to do. Any other questions?
No, sir.
All right, planning and redevelopment. Looks pretty straightforward there. The personal services, I told you, we budgeted for Marie's salary for the entire year. She's planning on retiring December 31st. And there is no capital. I made just one note. The other contractual is essentially the money we pay the county to do our inspections and some of the development review work. We tend to average, I think it's 30 grand a month, so I just went with 360 or 370. And then the aid to government private agencies, that's the chamber money. The only reason I mention it is we're not planning on doing anything differently, was that the agreement is year to year and the agreement is up for October 1st. So Felicia will be negotiating just a refinement, I would say, because we changed some of the terms of the agreement last year to this year, but I don't think we're going to be looking to do much there. So unless council steers us in a different direction, our plan was to keep that as it is. You'll need a new agreement. You will have to approve the agreement, but the suggestion or the proposal is to keep the money the same. Business assistance, BAP.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Law enforcement. Okay, I'm on page 76 and 77. Law enforcement, as you know, as council recently approved the contract for the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office at an increase of about 2.7%. So that reflects mostly the contract. I think occasionally on a special event, we hire outside duty, so there might be a tiny bit more there. And the insurance is actually a proportion. We allocate the cost of all of our insurance coverages across all the divisions. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's directly related to E&O or law enforcement liability. It's just an easier way to allocate it across everything. So it's a percentage of our entire insurance bill. Okay, any questions? All right, I'm on page 78 and 79. You'll see the org chart for fire rescue.
The hard one.
Oh, yeah, one of those things, yeah. Geez, you guys stacked them at the end. So you see the org chart. I'm pleased. I hope you are. I'm pleased. I think the whole process, and not to give a swelled head to the two people that are sitting there, but I'm very happy. I think largely thanks to Felicia's guidance. She's there all the time. I think we got people doing what they do best. Tom Brennan is killing it, sometimes at the expense of some of the other things Jason wishes he was doing. But I think we got people doing what they do best, and I think it's showing. I think the whole operation, in my observation, is going quite well. So I'm pleased. I hope you guys are. Okay, moving on. Page 80, where the bad news for that decision comes, for the financial figures, this will be the first chance specifically for you to see the breakdown of the capital, what we meant when we said before the capital to be part of each page. If there's something in the capital to be purchased, there'll be a breakdown of it with the detail on the front page of it, and you see that right here. Now, in order to be part of the CIP.
By the way,
Sir?
just while we're at this, thank you for doing that. I love that.
Me too, I do too.
Where they put the breakout on the capital outlay.
Yeah, quick place to see it.
Yep.
So you might see, because the first thing I make them do is reconcile the CIP against the capital accounts. And they won't always reconcile because the CIP has the items in it that have a different threshold for capitalization. Generally, oversimplified, anything $10,000 and over goes in the CIP. So anything that's a capital item, like these 3 items, none of which are over 10 grand, would be in the capital section of the budget, but you wouldn't find them in the CIP. So these are small items, mostly tools for the most part. Ms. Kate?
Is that additional vehicle that you mentioned not appearing on this capital outlay page because it falls into those 3 different funds that public safety falls in?
Yes,
Okay,
the
so it's not-
particular, I wasn't trying to give them a honeymoon gift. The only reason I allowed them to buy a vehicle was because the funds are in the public safety fund. The money's already there.
Okay,
He needs the vehicle, so I said, you want to spend the public safety fund, you can buy the vehicle.
So that'll appear on that
Yeah,
fund.
when we get to 102, you'll see
Gotcha,
that.
102.
Good question. Okay, so the expenditures on page 81.
Moment.
Sorry,
Vice Mayor?
Excuse me, I do have a question.
Vice Mayor, go ahead.
Okay, I just want to make a real comment, first a comment on page 78 about the babysitting safety. I'm curious as to whether we can somehow advertise that, because I believe that that might become more needed in COVID when people go back to work and if their kids don't go back to school. So that's just a comment that we can talk about later. And I think that Katie might have answered my question on this page. The operating supplies, the $32,000 difference, is that the vehicle, Al? The difference in the ask for the 102,000 to the approved 70,000, does that have to do with the vehicle that Katie asked about?
No, that's probably me.
No, in operating supplies?
Okay. What the department director gives to me, I decide what they get, and that's probably, I cut $30,000 out of that account. I couldn't tell you the exact things that I did, but that had nothing to do with COVID. That was me being mean.
Just curious. Thank you very much.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm on page 81, and the year over year on the fire rescue personnel is 5.5, which is about right, so nothing special there. The only one that I identified in operating that might be worth a conversation, and as the vice mayor pointed out, there was a conversation for one that was reduced by a lot, was the insurance figure, but I maintain same thing happens there. There was 2 effects on that account. One was the obvious 10%-ish prorated across all funds. Won't translate to 10% on every budget because it depends how much money you got there. But remember, we also funded for the first time, or would that, I might get that in the wrong place. The cancer presumption would be personal services, right? There was something else in there. What was the other thing in there? Anybody remember?
The flood insurance is in there.
You're gonna have to talk up. I got nothing.
The flood insurance is in there and the cancer presumption.
Oh, it is in there?
Yes.
Okay, so the new thing that would represent an increase would be the funding. The cancer presumption bill was passed last year, and most insurance agencies took a while to figure out how to implement it. The league did it. This is the first full year we've been paying for it. So that's why that's another little chunk that added to that.
Can you speak for just a moment about overtime?
In fire specifically, here's what's happened, and the brief version is the Band-Aid box or the ambulance or I call it a Band-Aid box. The rescue, thank you. The rescue vehicle, which we funded and bought a new one and had the push in the door ceremony because it wasn't running. I'm kidding, just kidding. Means, well, okay, we have it, now we want to run it. So depending on what kind of call we get, in order to run it, we have to have the staffing. And the old way we used to do when both were available were if one person called in sick or was at training or was not physically there, we had to take the Band-Aid box out of service and put the extra person, if we're only down one, and move them over to the engine and just run the engine. What we now do with some limits that I will be pressing them to maintain, it's his decision, and based on her recommendation, to go, what do we need worse? And it's his job and it's his responsibility. I gave them the transition year to go, okay, we're supporting the purchase of the vehicle. Let's see what it's going to cost us not to take it out of service when somebody calls out, you bring somebody in. That's overtime. So there's FLSA overtime, which they get automatically, but that incremental extra comes depending on how much both units are available. So because we have both units, we have been doing it. Now, I did have a conversation with him. You saw I took 25 grand from what he wanted to say there will be some pressure to that, but it's his call. He's got to run the department, and he's got to decide, is this, when somebody calls in sick or they're at training or whatever, is this a day we can do without the Band-Aid box, the rescue unit, excuse me? We should do without it. That's part of being a manager. So I allowed this year to happen, and to their credit, they blew it out so fast that they got pretty conservative about it when they saw it was going to be a problem this year. And okay, they haven't exceeded it, but they're paying very close attention to it now.
Was that your answer?
Did I get a lifeline?
Yeah.
Is that my final answer? Yes, sir.
You look like you just froze, like you were a computer.
Like this, and I just lost it.
And I was like,
had a
somebody
question.
do something over there. Get the Band-Aid truck over here, for goodness sake.
It's a
Councilmember
Microsoft Teams
Gannon,
call.
go right
I'm
ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I think that's an important question and a very important discussion. I noticed on the community profile summary on page 26 that the number of total responses year over year was down, as well as the number of EMS responses was down, although the number of inspections actually increased like 100% or like 300%. It's
Well, I'd still say
4,000, but
that issue is deeper than those stats.
Okay.
With something that the county is in the middle of doing
With
that I think
Sunstar?
we'd be better suited to talk about at the workshop, just because it's in depth. But there's an incentive for us to want to maintain any calls we can get credit for. And there's a county push towards units not running on non-emergency calls.
okay.
And I would rather not do that. And that's part of, I think, our charm, in that you live here, you know, I know if I call 911, I'm getting our guys.
Not
And
Sunstar.
Yeah. And I think that's something thematic that we should stick to as a priority.
Yeah.
But you might be right in observing the particular stats, but I don't think in and by itself that should change something we do on how we decide
Right.
what we use to respond.
Is there an encroachment issue with Sunstar kind of waiting in our parking lots?
Yeah, they're not that ambitious.
Okay.
The annoyance factor with Sunstar, it's the design. I mean, I was at the meeting where they designed this stinking system in 1986. And the design is, and the county as the EMS authority pays them to do this, 24 million, something ridiculous. And they, by design, are supposed to be wandering around the county, waiting in subways and subway stores, parking lots with their engines running, in case they get a call, so they can meet the statutory or the contract requirement for response time. And I could tell you some more stories about how that works that you don't want to know. But there's nothing we can do about that. It might be partially in theory because the county wants EMS to be more justified in what they're doing. That's true. But so long as it's a choice, I will never recommend that we accept that premise, because I think we should be responding to all of our calls. I've had half the time I've ever seen them run on my employees, I usually have a complaint about Sunstar.
Wow.
Almost every time. So I mean, we have some guys that work for Sunstar on the side, you know, as an extra job.
Sure.
But as a general theme, I will never recommend that anybody other than our guys run on our calls.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Any other questions? Moving on.
Great
Sir?
explanation. Good job.
Okay, technical services. I'm on pages 82, we see the org chart. 83, goals and objectives and the personnel, pretty much the same. 84, the categorical expenditures. Everything looks pretty good here. The personal services is up 8%. I'm drawing a blank. Could somebody say something I can understand?
Brian Smith moved over into.
Brian Smith was promoted transferred over to technical services. When we promote or transfer, if we promote him, he gets a percentage, and he was already at the high end of his scale, so he came in at a high
Great.
position in the scale, which made that overall budget up slightly. Slightly more, higher than it normally would be. Okay. Professional operating, looks, it's up about 10%. I see I'm looking for something to jump out at me, and I don't see anything.
What about education?
Yeah, education and training was down significantly.
Well, that's me being me, but that could have had something to do. My theories are generally, I'm not a fan of out-of-state travel, period, for training. And by that, I've allowed it, but I don't love it. National trainings, to me, have, in some cases, very little significance. I will say on the fire side, they do, because, for example, Jason goes to the Executive Fire Officer Academy. You got to go to Emmitsburg, and they generally refund that anyway or pay for it. As far as conferences go, a lot of people, Marie goes to like a national planning thing. Well, you know, she kind of, it works for her. It makes some sense for her. The library, it makes some sense for her. Partially because of their networking and their contacts. But as a general rule, I think the state conferences are where we should focus. So sometimes somebody puts in for a national conference, I clip it, you can go to the state, not the national. As far as the particulars of what those asks were, I'm not entirely sure I know off the top of my head.
Insurance is up, it's a small division, so a minor change makes a big difference, but insurance is up a little bit, and then the operating supplies.
Oh, I thought the question was about education.
It's about education in general.
Okay.
And training.
So it's generally me. If it's a big cut, I couldn't tell you I know exactly until we look at the itemized what it is, but I can follow up with you later.
Sure.
Any other questions on that?
No.
All right, moving on. Streets Division, page 86, see the org chart. Page 87, see the personnel. Pretty much the same. There is one feature here on page 88 and 89. The personal services are up about 15%. The reason for that is we budgeted, asked for, council approved, kind of the same thing we tried to do with the human resources technician. We needed another administrative person in streets. We have, the technical service people have a lot to keep juggling with the projects and the engineers and the construction inspection. So streets are generally the field guys between fleet, facilities, streets and stormwater have a serious need for administrative help. And I'm sorry, bro, but Charlie is the public works administrator and he needs some administrative help. So we asked for permission to get a part-time employee, or actually we asked for the full-time position, and we just hired, have we offered the job yet? So we have a candidate that we're gonna offer the job to become an administrative assistant specifically for streets, stormwater, fleet, facilities, basically for Charlie. Now, the reason that has such an effect on the year is the same thing. We put a quarter of the money in the budget for this year, and now the whole thing for next year. Now, you may end up saving it because I wasn't convinced I was going to let him have a full-timer right away. We're going to see if a part-timer will do it, but I'm asking for approval for the full-time position, so that if she works out, we can offer the full-time position if the need is there. But she's accepting it based on the hope that it's full, but no guarantee. Okay? All right. Operating expense are actually down 1.4, so I think that looks pretty tight. And there's no capital. So if there's no other questions, we'll move on to the library. Page 90 and 91. You see the org chart, service program, goals and objectives, and the personnel. Personnel looks exactly the same as it was this year. Page 92. So the capital outlay might be a better way to say it. I'll say it. One of the first things that happens in the audit, because the definition of a capital item, a book, Well, maybe not. So we track it separately as if it's capital, but the first thing the auditor does or makes us do at year end is
Expensive.
Put it back.
reclass it back
Yeah.
into operating. So it's here for you, and every year we have a dedicated amount of money we use for the collection. And Sue was kind enough, because one of the things I did hack, the patron computers need to be replaced. And that was a COVID decision, because I think she originally asked for 14, although we did it so early, it doesn't show as her asking for 14. I cut that by 7 for this year because of COVID. We'll do that over 2 years. And to be fair, I didn't cut it, I split it. Instead of 14 this year, I said get 7 this year, we'll get 7 next year. Okay, any questions?
Nope, you answered it.
Page 94, I've heard a rumor. Chip, what's that rumor?
Starts in parks.
It starts in parks, I've heard.
It starts in parks. There we go.
So
Oh,
on page 94, we're starting in parks with the org chart, 95, goals and objectives, and the personnel, which again are identical to what we currently have. 96, you can see the capital outlay scheduled for parks. And on 97, you'll see all the departments with the parks expenditures. Personal services are up 3.7, that would be fine. I would consider anything less than 5 to be pretty normal. Now, if you ask the question, why would it be less than 5? People leave. Sometimes you have people come in at the low end of the scale, so sometimes replacements or vacancies make it lower. But I wouldn't think twice. I mean, I have the specifics on everybody, but if it's around 5, I figure that's okay. Now, if you guys changed either our merit or our COLA, then obviously that would change the whole dynamic there. And then the operating expenses are actually down 2.7. Chip did a good job with that. And improvements down by quite a bit, but there's your 56.5. Excuse me, on page 96, you can see what it makes up. There may be a question about sidewalk repair. We do major jobs, because we have streets guys that do sidewalk repair. They do kind of specific, hey, we need to get this fixed now, or this over here. And they have a plan for all those they hope to get done in the course of the year. If we have a super long section of something that needs to be done, we contract that out. This would likely be more like what the street stuff does. There is some particular patchwork, in this case probably related to one of the parks, that we would do ourselves. So that's why, sorry, that we wouldn't do ourselves. That's why you see an expense for that. Okay, any questions on parks?
You answered it.
Moving right along, right into recreation.
Councilmember Gannon, go ahead.
I just had a quick question on, for capital outlay, these particular projects, is this, in parks, is that where the Cypress Forest Spray Park renovations would have been? Or does the 302 sort of fund projects appear elsewhere?
I mean, legally, we would have a choice, but I think we chose 302, didn't we?
Yes.
Yeah, we selected 302 because in the governmental fund sense, we kind of rather have all of our projects go through the same fund. It's a little easier to track the revenues and the grants.
Okay.
Because in a sense, one of the problems that you have with general fund stuff is that if you put that in general fund, well, the grant had to go in general fund. So if the grant was way more or way less than what you spent, and the problem is if it's way more, are you being accused or are you using the rest of the money for something else?
You're eating.
So it's more important to track those. Special revenues are revenues that have legal restrictions on them. So because it's a grant project, if it's a governmental grant project, we would normally use 302.
302. Okay, thank you.
And the definition of that had morphed over the years. Bruce used it, I think we used to call it the Capital Streets Fund or something. He tried to focus specifically on only the roadway stuff. We found it was a better catch-all for anything on the governmental side, meaning not related to the enterprise funds. That was a major capital project.
Okay.
Choice, accounting choice.
Any other questions?
I have a question, Mayor.
Vice Mayor, go ahead.
I didn't see anywhere in the budget, and maybe I missed it, but I did try to go through line by line. Where is the money for the tree program that we're going to eventually have when COVID goes away? What account does that come out of?
I didn't understand what you said. Streets program?
Tree
Program.
planting.
The Arbor Day
Out here?
program, I'm just curious as to what account that will come out. That wouldn't be considered capital outlay, I guess. I don't know.
That would have been.
It's in operating supplies, and it'll be more significantly in an out year, meaning not next year. But there is some in the operating supplies account. Is it 20,
So it's in
29?
operating supplies. Okay.
5271.
Is this
We did
Alexis's
have
program?
one scheduled for this year. Is that still going to happen, or are we putting that
How
off?
much? We're doing, Linda, we're doing it every year. How much is it next year?
45.
Every year, okay, thank you.
45 in
Thank you very much.
operating supplies. 45,000.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I misspoke. 4,500, sorry.
5,000.
Starts and finishes in parks.
All downhill.
Questions on parks? We were in recreation. Page 100, you'll see the one capital outlay item. It's an office build-out in the Cypress Forest Rec Center, which we've needed for a while. We did something with the front desk. We're just doing some of the other stuff now. And the recreation personal services, only up 4.9, so I would consider that to be fine. You'll see the other contractual figure is up by quite a bit. Someone help me with that? What's that?
Well, the other contractual from the 1920 budget?
Yeah, 30, it's up 30.
Yeah, that's, we moved some money this year to cover trees. We covered some other uniform stuff, some other supplies that needed to be covered. Revision, budget.
All right, well, there's something I want to tell you about this because it relates to the question Kate asked originally.
Yeah.
But I said, what makes up the 85?
What makes up the 85? We added some money, well, it's going back to what we did last year with the, all right, let me put it up here, sorry.
Somebody look at the itemized and just read it to me.
Okay.
$100 for winter work scheduling, $9,000 for instructor dance, martial
It's the
arts.
instructors.
So these are all the instructor fees for the programs. Okay. Now, what, to Councilmember Gannon's question at the outset, this is one of the reasons that you don't want to have this in the actual document. Because the 30,000 or 52% increase is on the revised budget. Now, the revised budget total for that account item was reduced from a revision. So it may have been, let's say it was normally 85, but because he had some unforeseen circumstance this year and he wasn't going to need the 85, then he took the 85, moved it somewhere else. So now it says 55, which makes the 85 this year look like a whopping increase. It's
Gotcha.
deceptive.
Sure.
Yes.
So we want to provide the info with a qualifier, more or less. Okay,
Now, was there something specific about operating supplies?
yes, the lunches.
Ah, okay.
Not doing lunches anymore?
Well, we haven't done lunches because of COVID, but we want to. So a part of that is for lunches because we hope to. Whether that materializes remains to be seen.
Very good.
I only had one other question about this section. The capital outlay section includes this office build-out that didn't appear on last year's capital improvement budget. So I was curious what happened there.
One of the cases, I made him do it, the one for the recreation office, sometimes what I'll say is if he puts it in, I'll say, if you can do it this year, do it this year, which makes it disappear. And then the other way, he may just look at it and go, well, it either rapidly deteriorated or I want to see if I can get something done every year. So it wasn't planned out the way we normally plan out CIP.
Okay.
He just needed to, he walks around the facility and goes, what needs to be? I'm on him right now because we want to convert one of the bathroom stalls to a shower in there. Well, that won't be a capital item more likely, but that's what he has to do. He's got to kind of evaluate what he's got going on, what he needs. So it tends to take on more of a sudden nature there. But I think the answer to your question was, he discovered he needed to do something badly with it, so.
Other improvement projects that were on last year's capital improvement budget kind of disappeared.
Yeah, I do that.
You do that, okay. so
Sometimes
like-
I decide for him whether I think that needs to go away or get delayed, and it could come back.
It could come back, because
Yeah, it changes.
Cypress Forest Spray Park renovation disappeared, so did the Women's
Yeah.
Club roof, that disappeared.
Well, if you remember with council, council approved the start to the Spray Park project bidding, right? So you started that, but by the time that finishes,
Comes in, we can put it back.
and if it comes due next year, then we'll do it with a budget revision, but
Okay.
we weren't sure how that was gonna work. So we actually thought, the reason it's not here is we thought we were gonna do it this year.
Right, so even
why
though
it would've
something
disappeared.
drops off the capital improvement scheme. of
It'll be a
1,
rebudget.
2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, it could be a rebudget,
Doesn't matter, okay.
once we know when it's actually gonna happen.
Okay, that answers
But it
a lot of my
disappeared,
questions.
it disappeared for this document because we thought we were actually gonna do it this year.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on.
Yes, sir.
OSC.
All right, so we're moving through recreation onto the sports complex. Page 102, there's your personnel in the org chart, the service program, goals and objectives, the personnel, cool picture. We still don't have one of those? Did we trip over one of them yet?
They buried him in the
I
back.
thought, you made this big teaser, and everybody's going, what is it? Page 103, nice picture of BMX, probably Cindy's kid. I don't know. No? Tried, okay. Page 104, you have the capital outlay, which is
Fence.
annual fence replacement. I think we actually normally spend 40, but we need a lot of fence. So we do that as capital outlay every year at the sports complex. And obviously, you might ask the question about BMX.
Right.
But it would be the same thing as the answer to the question about the spray park. We would track that through 302.
Okay.
It clearly belongs to the sports complex, but I don't want to commingle that with other general fund revenues, because like there's an old argument about anything you get, like the fire department and I have an argument all the time about if they get credited for something, they want to credit the expense. Well, there's an accounting rule that says you can't do that because you don't want to make it look like the expense never happened, which if you didn't know you had an expense and then a credit. Well, that hurts them because even though they're getting the credit, the money goes back into general fund revenue, which funds everything in general fund. So it's a legitimate argument, but that's the kind of thing. I don't want to put anything in general fund just for the sake of having it in the particular division. Capital projects to us belong in the capital projects fund.
Okay, thank you.
Okay? So we've got the sports complex expenditures, which I'm looking at for year over year. It's actually 2.8% less, so we're good there. And then operating is up 9.4. Looking for big tickets, the insurance is up a bit, and I don't see much else that's horrific. What am I missing? Maintenance and repairs, that's probably, we got some projected work to do in the park there. But overall, it's not too bad, and there's one piece, just the fence in capital. So overall, the division's down by 20%.
What has our BMX operator been doing?
Cross-training, Chip, you wanna?
He's been working on special projects.
Oh, good.
He's been doing the trail marker installation. He's worked on the kayak trail sign replacement. So we've just been trying to keep him busy with special projects.
Which there are
And he
always
actually
plenty
has-
of.
Yes, and he has been out at the track doing some maintenance work to make sure the track doesn't go into disrepair.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Moving on to communications, marketing, and the arts. Page 106, the org chart, 107, personnel, 108, categories of expenditure. And I'll beat Vice Mayor Norris to the question. You'll see nothing in the capital outlay, which is where the art and public places money was intended to normally be. We've encumbered it for Mr. Gialanella. We have not spent it all yet. The capital outlay, did we bump that out a year? Was that supposed to be this year? So it started last year, it got carried over to this year for the 40, and you gotta remember, we only had 29 in the fund. It's still a choice, you know, that capital fee for, we always ask anybody who's gonna build something, would you be willing to contribute to the arts? But that's not a requirement. So we spent all of that in that 40, and I'm fully intend on continuing the commitment to the program, but we bumped what would have been this year's 40, because we don't have any, to be next year, since we're not even done with the Gianella project yet. That's why it says nothing in the capital outlay.
I appreciate that, but I also wanted to express my appreciation for not moving the next 40,000 out another year. You guys, what you did was, I realized that this 40 is going to be spent next year because the project's not going to be done due to COVID, but you could have moved it. You could have skipped a year and then it'd be another year before we did another 40, but y'all didn't do that. And I really appreciate that. So thank you.
Okay, so on personal services, personal services are down, up by 2.8. So we're good there, less than 5. Operating is up quite a bit. Some of that is insurance, some of that is printing. We now distribute the Experience Oldsmar magazine 3 times a year to every household. I think it's been a huge hit, so I think it's money well spent. But we're showing off because of our talents. It costs money, but boy, I get so many people, thinking that's professionally made magazine. It's all in-house, right? So that's one of the reasons the printing costs have gone up a bit, and the postage,
But
because
getting
we're
it in the
sending out to
mail
everybody.
is so much more effective than having people have to pick it up somewhere.
Yeah, I've had
Find it,
people,
yeah.
I've had a couple of people say they actually leave it out as like a, coffee table magazine kind of thing because of the quality of it.
If you're
So-
looking for something to do this weekend, it's right there. You got it in the mail,
Yeah, it's
I like
great.
that.
It's really
I
good
really
stuff.
like that.
It's
Good stuff.
her deal and her people.
Money well spent.
All right, any other questions about communication marketing? Everything looks pretty much in line.
Good.
On to administrative services. Page 110, there you have the org chart. You'll notice that the human resource administrator to become human resource director is no longer there. Personal services reflects that same thing for both human resource administrator being removed and the human resource technician being moved to the city manager's office. Page 112, you'll see the capital outlay box on top or beneath the expenditure categories. Traditionally, we spend about 125 to 150,000 a year, or excuse me, we budget 125 to 150 per year on IT keeping up needs, replacing PCs, replacing servers, replacing switches, increasing our wireless footprint. And so this is pretty normal stuff as far as what we're asking them to do. And there is fire rescue wireless modems for the trucks, right? So we're adding that. We're adding wireless modems in the trucks at the fire department. So that's how that number comes to be. On page 113,
Hold
the
up.
administrative,
I
sir?
had a question on the AV equipment replacement program. Are we planning on attempting to upgrade some of the hardware we have, in particular for council? I would use the example of the recent events where we were kind of pressing together ways to make things work. It seems to me that we ought to consider investing some on a setup that would allow us, depending on what the expenditure was, the dollar amount, and plan for potentially a longer haul with COVID, where, and I'll use the product Zoom as an example, but we could do a quasi Zoom with people here and with someone remote, where whoever's speaking, it comes up on the monitors, and it's a nice, clean way where if we find ourselves in a situation where we have someone who's calling in, that we don't have, that we now have equipment and technology that would actually allow an individual or two individuals to Zoom in with the rest of us here and it be able to be integrated.
We're gonna have to do something more than what we've done so far with that. Exactly what that's gonna be, I think we still need to figure out, but I'll try and have something put together for you for the workshop, just so you can tell we're working on it.
Okay.
Just a more robust system,
Yeah, I mean,
right?
listen, we got this system. I was here when we approved this system, when we were across the street and coming over, and we were sadly disappointed to learn that either technology had changed very quickly or there was some deficiency we found later with what we acquired, where we couldn't, our inability to stream live is something that we need to address. I mean, that's got to be something we need to address for a multitude of reasons, but, it got highlighted in this. But we look good. This is a good-looking operation, but we also just kind of learned that we probably need to invest some money in that.
Mayor, can I say something?
Absolutely.
I'd like to just share a short story. This past weekend, I've been doing some research to find my family over in Poland. Well, they sent me an invitation to my great cousin's daughter's wedding. And I was like very shocked to see this. So anyways, to make a long story short, Saturday morning at 9 a.m., the wedding was taking place in Poland at 3 p.m. It was a live stream. They had an aerial of the church, and then they went live through YouTube, and I was able to cast it to the TV in my house, and I watched the entire hour wedding in a church in Warsaw, Poland. So the technology is there for us to do this, and we can go live for our council meetings or whatever.
Yeah.
I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, that's interesting. How'd the wedding turn out? They get married in the end?
To be honest with you, it was absolutely beautiful. Whatever the company did in Poland to do this live, like my sister was on, my brother, my nieces, my nephews. I had my whole family on the watching YouTube live instantly, and I was really impressed. And I just wanted to share that with you. So the technology is there. We can do it.
Yeah. And I think, we don't know how long this is going to go on, up and down, but it would be a good investment for us. And so if council concurs with that, something we work on.
Okay.
All right, thank you, sir.
No problem. Okay, administrative services, personal service expenses are down 15%. You know why?
Thank you, Al.
Yeah. They're operating are up by 1.9, that's
So
pretty good.
yours went down the most and his went up the most.
Yeah.
We don't have to get into details as to why, but
And capital, you see the components on the previous page. So anybody got any questions on administrative services?
What was the professional services that is now gone? That,
We've done what, appraisals and,
Yeah, actuary.
yeah, generally an actuarial evaluation we'll put there, but we don't tend to do one of those. Administrative services doesn't do one every year.
okay,
The pension plan has to do one every year, but the city doesn't necessarily.
okay, thank you. That's all.
All right, moving on to fleet. One of Charlie's divisions, page 114, 115. We got a little cutie. Who does that belong to?
Barbara's niece.
Barb's niece or something. And then page 116. Category expenditures, same personnel. Personnel up personnel expense up 3.2, that's good. Operating up 5.6, that's decent. Maintenance is up a little bit, that's good. Charlie's always pressing for more maintenance money, and we probably didn't give him as much as he deserved, but everything else looks pretty tight. Even that's tight. I don't see anything else that jumps off the page. Operating supplies a little bit, but it's only 5.6 up and no capital. So anybody have any questions on fleet?
Nope.
And if anybody wants to have lunch on a clean floor, just go to the garage and you can eat lunch off Barrow's floor, I promise.
I've seen that. It's unbelievable.
And an Oldsmar visit. Okay, facilities. You see the org chart. Most of you know this, but facilities works for leisure services. So Chip is their ultimate department head. Alexis is their direct report, in case that ever comes up. Page 118, 119. The personnel, same mix. And then page 120, you see the capital outlay with the projects we hope to accomplish. The one I wanted to mention was the PCSO substation.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about that.
I asked Daniel to kind of give me a conceptual back of a napkin drawing. I wanted to create, at the height of the latest of the shootings, I think it was probably the Virginia Beach one, I wanted to create a substation in City Hall for the sheriff's office just as you walk in. Instead of this down here, so that down here is a couple of desks in a room that's about 10 by 10, maybe. Here, where the receptionist desk was, we talked about closing in either the room to the left, kind of that square, you walk in the door where the car is, or the one right in front of you. Yeah. Did you get that on camera?
You all right?
Yeah. I had a leg cramp, and I tried to kick it out before it got me. Yeah, take 6 of you.
Hold on, that's quick. You all right?
Yeah.
You just roll off the side is what happened?
I think he did,
I took my
yeah.
leg out because I was getting a cramp. And I just got that pad thing.
Mayor, why don't we
So I
take
went to kick my leg out and I kicked myself back off the
All
thing.
right, all right. You want to get him a new chair?
Get a different chair, yeah.
Yeah, I'll get that.
No, the chair's all right.
No,
the
the
chair.
chair broke.
Charge it to Cindy's.
Mayor, why don't we take a break for 5
Yeah,
minutes,
you
10
want,
minutes?
at this time, the chair will entertain a motion to recess for 15 minutes.
So moved.
Second?
So I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Sensing you're ready to vote. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. We are recessed till 11:15.
Yeah, no, I'm fine. I was trying to fight a cramp and I just pushed myself off the ledge. Although that would make me want to tell you the story about Monday.
The face he made too, as he went down, I'm like, oh boy.
Well, I think the sheriff's department needs to understand how committed you are to this. They owe you big time. Y'all remember your mask, okay?
Thank
Order. And I think I actually need a motion to reconvene the meeting.
Mayor, I make a motion.
I have a motion. I have a second. Second. Any discussion? Sensing you're ready to vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, I'll turn it back over to our rumbling, tumbling city manager. Sorry.
All right, so somewhere in the midst of the last thing I remember, we were in facilities. And it was going well before my leg cramped. And we were talking about the substation for the SO, which I believe I explained with non-failing grace. No, too much falling grace. So any questions on that? Other than that, we were 4.4 increase on personal services. That's well within norm rates, same personnel. The operating expenses are down by 6.9, that's good. The capital is down by about 56. You see the components on the previous page, and the department's down by 14, so looking good there. Any other questions on facilities?
Al, what was the difference between what was requested and what was approved for that building's line
That 50
item?
grand, you mean? The 145 against the 94? Mm-hmm. Can somebody tell me, since I don't remember off the top of my head? Chip, do you know? Substation's in, the restroom renovation is in. I think I clipped part of the city hall thing, no?
Split the PCSO in half.
We did.
Oh, yeah, that's what it looks like.
Yeah, I split the PCSO into two pieces, and there's still about another 25 missing.
The restroom
Oh, restroom,
renovation.
yeah, the restroom.
Okay.
They wanted to
There you
spend
go.
50 next year, and
split
I
those two
told them to
things.
split it.
So they won't get the jails in there until the following year.
All right, so we're almost finished with general fund. The next page is interfund transfers, which are simply money we're moving to other funds for particular projects. Hope I could remember them. We are planning on $533,980 for interfund transfers. Can somebody give me the breakdown there?
150,000 to public
All right, so the ad valorem transfer once a year to Fund 102 was 150?
150,
150, what else?
$100,000 for capital improvement for debt,
So $100,000 towards the payment of the capital improvement for the HP debt, what else?
and $283,980 for HP debt into the 206 fund
For what?
for Harbor Palms debt.
Harbor Farm, what was the 100 for?
The debt service.
Both the 100 and the other one? Okay, so Harbor Palms debt and the money we normally transfer every year to the Public Safety Fund, that 1/10 of a mil. Now that, the actual transfer, if you looked at the CAFR, won't be exactly 150. 150 is our guess, whatever the ad valorem comes in at when we do the closing of the books. The year end will take 1/10 of 1 mil based on that actual number. It'll be around there. Could be a little higher or lower. Okay. Moving on to reserve, which is page 128 and 129. Now you will notice, I suspect you all did, that the reserve number is significantly lower. I would say this is COVID, but I'm not overly concerned. The political argument you'll hear in other places is this is the rainy day fund or the contingency fund, and it's kind of a budget balancer because on the other side of the revenues, you budget appropriated reserve, which is a fancy way of saying it's cash that we've got on hand that we use to balance the budget. So while it's, the optics of it suggest a healthy number there is a good idea, the most important part is do you have the cash? And we have, general fund cash is in very good shape. So I am okay with it. You might not be, and we'll do whatever you guys need us to do. Knowing that revenues are such a potential problem that could get worse, if you said make that $1 million, the only way we'd be able to make that $1 million would be to increase the appropriated reserve, which would put more pressure on the cash. So I'm okay with this. It can be expensed. I mean, you can charge against it. I've done it, but it's largely a budget balancing figure, and I'm okay with it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have proposed it. But that's council call.
Anyone have any comments?
I just had-
Councilman Gannon?
Thank you, Mayor. I just had a little sticker shock when I saw last year and 2017, 18, 2018, 19, the 1.1 million down to 418,000. I was like, whoa.
Should I give it the lecture?
But if it's your area of expertise and you're telling me that you're okay with it.
Look, here,
Okay.
my big problem with it, and this is, everybody does this a tiny bit differently, but essentially in governmental budgeting, you have appropriated reserve, some call it prior year surplus, that's a revenue. It's a projected revenue. All it means, and it's largely because of the timing of when you do the budget, that says, here's what I know I have in pocket to use for the budget if I need it from money that I've made. Now remember, when you do that, you're in the middle of a budget year. So it's got to be, you can't appropriate something you don't have. So you have to know you have it before you can make that number say anything, because you don't know how that year's going to turn out. You could lose your shirt in that year and end up with no money. So you got to know that number's good. Here's where the problem is. On the expenditure side, you have to have a balanced budget, right? So if your rainy day fund, or this figure, contingency reserve, is the same as the appropriated reserve, what have you done?
You're about to tell me.
In net terms, you've done nothing.
Nothing.
Right? But in good terms for fiscal conservatism, you're really adopting a balanced budget because you're not using any money that you might have for the sake of making sure the budget balances. So if those numbers are the same, you're truly balanced budgeting.
Budget.
Right. If you make the appropriated reserve number higher than the contingency reserve, what are you doing?
Decrease, yeah.
You're deficit budgeting.
Deficit.
Because you're saying, I'm going to need money I've already got in order to make sure the budget balances. So if you wanted to make this number higher, because you could do it the other way, but it rarely happens the other way. I mean, ideally, you wouldn't do it in either case. You'd go, I don't need any cash that I've got in fund balance to balance the budget. That would be ideal. It hasn't happened in history. So because of where you are when you do it, you have to say, okay, how much am I going to need to make sure I can balance the budget? So I could make that number higher if you wanted to, but since I'm already trying to be as realistic but conservative on the revenues, the only way to keep it balanced if I raise the expenditure side would be to raise the appropriated reserve even higher. Not a good year to do that. My other point to you would be, look at the number for the budget for this year. Your point's well taken. it's consistently got lower and lower, that's me. Because Bruce clearly paid more attention to the optics for you guys, because the detail behind it gets a little difficult to explain. Look at the number that you got now, 889, 370. How much of it have we spent?
None,
None,
none.
right?
If we don't,
Yeah, the other point to consider is, of course, we brought revenue down by 2%. I mean, in real terms. And so,
so I mean, well, I'll do whatever the council wants with that. I'm comfortable with that there because we're not going to spend it. And we'll adjust the budget accordingly. Because sometimes we hit it in a budget revision if we want to make it truly accounted for if we don't have some other revenue. But that's where it kind of gets a little
Right.
confusing technically.
I'm comfortable exactly as you explained it.
Okay.
yeah, and I'll add to that and say that, once again, we're kind of going into this assuming some bad worst-case scenarios that personally, I don't believe that's where we're going to end up. And maybe it's the optimist in me, but, nobody knows for sure.
Right.
And so, as we said earlier, it's going to be much more of a living document this year than ever before, at least for the council. It's always a living document for staff, right? And I did have a question as it related to, I didn't see it anywhere in here, and maybe it's because we have not received it, and that is the $250 that we were getting back from the hurricane reimbursement.
We don't budget that. It's in the financial statements.
Oh, okay.
We book it,
Yeah, all
we
right,
don't
that's fine.
budget it.
All right,
Don't
that's fine,
budget.
that's fine.
Okay.
That works, more about a financial statement.
Did
P&L?
accrue most of that in the last fiscal year,
Okay, all
so kind of a wash.
right. Well, we don't book that, we're gonna spend it.
Right, accruing it is financial reporting. If we were budgeting it, we would be making a statement ahead of time saying, we think that's what we're gonna get. Well, the whole thing was kind of after the fact, because we decided to do it after we incurred the expense.
Right.
The expense would show, but,
Okay.
all right, any other questions on wherever we were? Contingency reserve, or me falling on my ass, or?
I think it looks good.
Okay, well, we're into the special revenue and enterprise funds, and I'm going to turn it over to Cindy and try and stay on my feet. Off my feet.
Good job, Al.
Good job,
Thank you, Al.
good job. I'm not gonna applaud because it's budget meeting, and it feels weird.
Okay, the next 7 or so funds will be what we call the other funds. Sometimes in accounting, we call it other fund. Sorry, I had to get a joke in there. The next 4 will be considered special revenue funds. And those funds, that means that the money coming into those funds is legally restricted, and we can't use it for anything else, just that specific purpose. So if you go ahead and turn your page to page 132. Okay, this is a public safety impact fund. This will also be the first instance where you see the spirit of Oldsmar, the spirit of R.E. Olds. Can anybody find
Is it on the door?
No, he's in the windshield.
Passenger seat.
He's in the windshield.
Oh, yeah, there it is.
That is unfair.
Tricky.
Yeah, we have a very creative senior admin assistant, Barbara, who, that was her idea.
That's cool.
Looks like Andrew in that picture.
I was there.
Well done.
I'm just gonna go ahead, and the biggest ticket items in this fund will be the major capital expense. For the revenues, we took kind of a conservative approach. We don't really know what's gonna happen next year. So this is an impact fund to account for the fire suppression impact fees and how we spend it. So we, as Al had mentioned previously, we have a transfer $150,000 into this fund, and that is the ad valorem transfer as approved on resolution 2019-06. And that's 1/10 of 1 mil of our ad valorem proceeds. Obviously, the number is gonna be a little bit different, but we just like round numbers for this stage of the game. The impact fees are estimated to be about $25,000, and again, as we can address that as we go along throughout the budget year if things change. The expenditures, we have 2 items budgeted for next year. We have bunker gear replacement for $30,000, and also we're going to replace the 2008 Ford Explorer which is vehicle number 158, OL, also OL 300 for $45,000. Okay. Have any other questions?
Dan wants a picture.
Who drives that
Oh,
vehicle?
it's time. Yeah.
Whose vehicle is that?
Ready to move along? We'll go to the next page, or the next fund. This is starting on page 134. It's the Parkland Dedication Fund. And this fund accounts for impact fees and other fees that are collected on new development, just as the Public Safety Impact Fund is. And for next year, we're projecting about $35,000. Again, that's as a conservative approach. We will address that as we go along throughout the budget year. We are not really expecting to spend much money out of this fund for the next year. We do have about $15,000 that we've earmarked for improvements in the Mobley Bayou Wilderness Preserve. And that is, we will be saving the rest for future projects.
We spent a lot of it last year, I can see.
Indeed.
Sam?
All right, have any questions? Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to page 136. This is a multimodal impact fund. This fund is another special revenue fund, and it is set up to collect the multimodal impact fees, also collected on new construction. The amount we budget is actually at net because we have to turn over about 50% of this revenue to the county. We collect it and then we split the money with the county effectively. And on page 136, there is another little hidden instance of the Spirit of Oldsmar. Do you see it?
I do.
He's on the front bumper underneath the headlight.
Where's Waldo? Where's Waldo?
You got good eyes.
Double glasses. I actually have really terrible eyes.
We play with numbers all day. We have to make it fun, right?
All right. So does that represent like somebody hit him when they were driving? We might want to stay away from that one.
That was original. It was on the car.
With a 4-barrel.
Moving on to the next page on 137. Okay, again, we're taking the more conservative approach. We're budgeted $50,000 for the revenues, and of that amount, we are going to save it all for future projects. And this revenue can be used for anything, any major transportation project, such as land acquisition surveys, or even multimodal impact studies for any kind of transportation project concern we have.
Do we, in this, would we envision, because I don't believe they paid their impact fees yet, and that's like, say, Dr. Shim, for example, or the other, the,
Views.
Across from the library.
yeah.
Those would be in the CRA though.
Okay,
Next page.
gotcha. Are they in there, though? Do you know? Gotcha, okay.
Again, if we have a great year, we will address this number moving forward. We have some good new development, then we will address it in budget revisions. Okay, moving on to page 138. It's our Community Redevelopment Agency Fund. As Al had mentioned, this the CRA agreement with Pinellas County will expire in 2026. We're currently in the process of renegotiating that agreement to see if we can extend it. Again, whether or not they do extend it is an uncertainty at this point.
Is it it's more an issue with the state, isn't it?
What?
Yeah.
The extension of the CRA?
Both, but I think the county ultimately has the power to decide. You know, the whole thing boils down to the definition. If there's no urban blight, then you got nothing. The question is, the county is supposed to have created a mechanism by which you still could get some projects done, and that's been unclear, and I think it's taken a back seat because of the other issues they've had. But I think the bottom line, and Tom would probably know more about it than any of us, because I know he's been involved in Dunedin's, is that it's a negotiation, and the state part that the mayor was mentioning, if passed, would eliminate the whole thing. Or
It's like
sunset
it's a
it.
sunset by
Yeah,
state
yeah.
statute, yeah.
And so yes, if the state does that, and I'm not sure they actually did it yet, but if they did it, then none of it matters. The
Doesn't matter
county
what
is
the
still
county
kind of keeping hope alive, but it's definitely in jeopardy. Tom, do you know anything about the most recent part of that?
It's not been sunsetted, and so it's mainly our negotiations with Pinellas County.
We'll give it the old college try.
With Dunedin as an example, they extended it for a period of time, but they had basically a review period, extended for 10, but we're gonna look at it in 5. And if you're not meeting the goals and objectives under your master plan, then we have the right to terminate it.
Terminate the next 5.
Yes. So, anyhow, so it could be negotiated different ways, but it's not a given that once it goes, it's gonna be for the whole period of time. They want these look backs.
Is the
That's probably
blight
not a bad thing.
definition, is the blight part a big consideration?
Well, that's obviously the arguments that we make when we try to get it to extend it, but people don't like to be using that terminology, that we don't wanna have blight in our city. We don't wanna argue that we do have it, and therefore it's kind of a catch-22.
You, no, I'm,
Improvement.
yeah,
All right, thank you.
thank you.
Okay, so main revenue sources in this fund are the current ad valorem taxes, which is the current millage, the proposed millage rate multiplied by the value of the CRA property, the taxable value. Also, based on this calculation, is the county's contribution. So what happens once the Value Adjustment Board has finished their hearings for the year, which should be, hopefully, this year it was late, but it should be by February, March next year, we'll know what the final taxable value is, and then we'll be able to do the calculations. We'll do an internal transfer for the city's ad valorem tax, and then we will invoice the county for the county's share of it. Also, you will notice that in the department request to the city manager approved, there was $12 million of debt, and that would have been for the garage project. It's also reflected down below in the expenditure section, and that is, our best estimate of what it may cost, a preliminary estimate. So that is, just due to the timing and the current uncertainties, that has been bumped out or delayed until next year. And there's a lot of groundwork that needs to be done in advance. We need to finish the master plan and some other things, line up the infrastructure needs, the underground infrastructure, before we can proceed with that. So that's why it's been bumped out.
Let me, and I'm going to direct this to Al. Talk about having a workshop on downtown capital improvements and budget related. When do you think is a good time for us to do that? I know we have some stuff out right now that's helping us with design requirements and that type of stuff, so we'll have more substantial information to look at. But when do you think might be a good time for us to start thinking about that?
Well, as it relates to this document, it might be a good idea to face some of those conversational questions before we finalize here, which would mean sometime before the first meeting in September, although you could do it between the 2 meetings. Since we're bumping a lot of things just back a year, you certainly have the flexibility to have it sometime after that. But I think the sooner we formulate whatever the official plan is going to be, even though we also know we have to maybe continually tweak it, is I'd say either rush to get it done, meaning get the conversations done before we adopt the first public hearing on this document, or maybe give it 6 months before we even address it at all, since we don't know how long this is going to last, and we might need to know more about numbers before we decided what the next thing was. In general, and we're ready to do it now, we have a whole different presentation ready if you wanted to have those discussions now, because we're ready to frame the conversation to say, these are the decisions you're going to have to make. Because it all pretty much relates to next door or downtown in general. COVID, in one sense, takes a little of the pressure off, but we have a slide that relates to the timing of the chronology of how long each step would take, even if we were plowing forward right now, which I think is a bit more realistic. We went through it with you to go, look, okay, we're all excited about wanting to make stuff happen, but the realities of the construction process and the bid process and the purchasing process and the permitting process it just doesn't happen that fast. So one of the slides we put up was kind of an outline, not with specific dates per se, but in some cases, a guess at to what the date would be if we were moving forward, but a relative date to say the permitting, the design would have to be here, and then 6 months after that would be when you could start this, and then 2 years after that would be when you could start this. That might be a good one to look at our, whenever the next workshop is, so you guys can kind of frame the whole process into a more realistic time frame. The 12 million for the garage was actually easy, well, partially because, as I said to you, I didn't want the budget to come in at like 55 million and when everybody else is coming in way lower for the optics. It just wouldn't look good. But realistically, it was easy because if we plow forward right now with everything we're doing between the design work on the infrastructure, the actual infrastructure preparation, the hotel, now they might be able to have some overlap, the permitting, the purchasing process with DCPs involved and whatever, we're probably looking at 2 years at least before we could start building a garage. So that made that a little easier to say, well, look, we want to keep it in front of you because we want to be studying what it's going to cost and where is the collective enthusiasm for it. But as far as next year, it really wasn't hard to say, well, realistically, it isn't going to probably happen next year.
Yeah, and I think everyone probably recognizes that. I mean, it's just a timing thing. But beyond the budget, I was asking the question more in general. So you think perhaps August, sometime late August?
I would, because I think we need to be, the thing I'm concerned about more than anything isn't whether or not we do it. That's not the point. I give you the information, you decide if we do it. I want to make sure that there's at least a collective conversation about all of what goes into that. And there's a boatload of stuff that's now made more complex by COVID. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but for now we're just saying bump it down the road a little bit. There's a lot of conversational stuff that we haven't had collectively from the council, the guidance to say, this is how I want you to approach this. May not change anybody's mind, may change everybody's mind, may just tweak it. But I would appreciate the opportunity to have that conversation.
Okay. Well, we'll look to establish, maybe we get it on the next agenda to pick a date. Might be the way to go about it.
Yeah.
And we can have that conversation because, clearly we're sitting here with land that we spent years buying with CRA money and whatnot. And of course, COVID comes along and kind of slow our roll. But clearly, the anchor part of that with the boutique hotel and the rooftop bar, I think it allows us to reestablish momentum. The unknowns in that, to me, are why we're talking about capital improvement budget for this year, that year. We do this 6 years out. There are some realities that are going to take place in terms of what gets done and what doesn't get done. So in any event, sorry, I didn't mean to digress from your presentation, but it seemed like the appropriate place.
Yeah, no problem. So we talked about the revenues. We have a little bit of rents and royalties that we have recorded in the CRA fund, kind of a continuation of what we've had before. And as we move down to the expenses, they're pretty much consistent. We've had have had the ability to increase the reserves a little bit, amounts we're saving for the future because our operating expenses are so low. Also, down in the capital section, we have $500,000 budgeted for the downtown common area improvements, which is a site plan. The evaluation committee is currently making the final decisions on the proposals, and then we plan to award this early next year, early in October.
Okay.
So that 500,000 is our best estimate at this point in time. The other item in there is $90,000 for some LED lighting, and that is from Tampa Road to the intersection at State Street and St. Pete Drive. And those are just new lights. There's currently nothing in place in that area. So just kind of a safety improvement. Yeah, do we have any other questions about the CRA?
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to page 141. And this fund is a debt service fund. We now have two of them. This is the first one. It's been around for quite a few years. This is for the Veterans Memorial Park. And we do have a loan that we had refinanced a previous borrowing in 2012. And this particular loan matures in 2022. So we're almost done with it, a couple more years. This is basically the debt service funds are to account for the resources that are required to pay principal and interest on outstanding debt. And these funds are typically required by the loan agreements. So the loan agreements with the funding agency will outline this requirement. This particular pledge is electric utility taxes. So this is kind of an easy one to budget and account for. It's in and out. So we are budgeting $167,000 of utility taxes, which is kind of a transfer from the general fund. And then also the debt service is the same amount with $160,000 to principal and the rest to interest. The current balance on this loan at the end of 9/30/20 will be about $493,000. And again, this debt matures in 2022. So I'm working with this for a while. So. All right, any questions here?
Nope.
Okay, moving on to the next page, we have this is a new fund, and it's the debt service fund for the Harbor Palms infrastructure improvements. As you know, we took out a $6 million loan for the governmental portion of for the Harbor Palms infrastructure project. This fund represents the governmental portion. At this point in time, we still have to go out for bid for phase 2 of the project. So the mix between stormwater and the street and sidewalk restoration is still kind of uncertain. It depends on when we get the bids back. The rest of this debt service is reflected in the stormwater fund, which is Fund 405, which we'll get to a little bit later. It's a new fund. This loan is currently in the construction draw phase, and it will, which will end on March 11th, 2021. So we're nearing the end of this, and then we get into the final repayment period for this particular debt issue. The interest rate is 2.81, and again, this is just for the governmental section. The debt related to the stormwater section, which is estimated at this point in time, will be reflected in another fund because it's different type of accounting there. Again, we will increase these actual amounts as we have a little bit more information. This loan will mature in 2033. So, any questions on this one? All right, moving on to page 144. Yeah, I think we have another.
There's his face again. That's an easy one.
Now that we know to look for.
Oldsmar shining through, right? Perfect place to do it. Okay, this is a capital improvement fund, and this is probably for us one of the most fun funds. This is where it's a capital project fund where all of the money put into this fund is there for a particular purpose, and it's to accumulate resources we need to fund our major city projects. What this does is it also lends some consistency to the other funds, the other governmental funds, because otherwise, if we were to put a lot of these projects in the general fund, you would see general fund, get very big, go very, very low. So it's really a great tool for us to keep track of these big projects and accumulate funds, so it doesn't skew the budgets in other places. Okay, so basically, we put a lot of the local option gas taxes go in this fund, and as well as penny for Pinellas typically, and a lot of the grant funding for the major projects. So the money the revenue always ties directly to a particular project or a particular purpose, like saving for a particular project. In the capital outlay section, it's probably the easiest place to start because all the money's there for a particular reason. The Harbor Palms Phase 2, right now we're estimating this to be about $1.115 million, about a little over $1 million for this phase of the project. Again, this is Phase 2. We'll know more about this as we get closer, to the bid. We're undergoing some engineering work to kind of finalize the plans for this. So Dan could probably provide some information about when we expect to go to bid, but it's probably going to be middle of next year. Okay, this is going to be 100% debt funding for the streets and for the street and sidewalk restoration. Citywide street resurfacing is budgeted to be about $250,000, and local option gas taxes pay for that. And then a Douglas Road roadway improvement, which is the widening project. It's phase one of the widening projects. It has been split into 2 phases. This part of the phase is $3.2 million, and $2.2 million of that will be paid for by Penny for Pinellas, money that we've already saved up, and then $1 million will be from a state appropriation. Okay, the Oldsmar Trail, Phase 6. This is a trail along part of Douglas Road. This is a LAP project with the FDOT, so it's a federal pass-through. The project estimate's going to be $1.4 million. Grant funding will be about $1.1 million, and the rest will be local contribution from the city. And then the final project of this fund is Oldsmar, or the OSC improvements in BMX, which is also tagged for the BMX project. Right now, we're estimating about $1 million for this project, and we have some Penny for Pinellas money saved that can fund this project. Okay. All right, any other questions on this fund?
You're on a roll.
On a roll, okay. Okay, moving along, we get into the city's enterprise funds. These funds, the next 4 funds are set up to operate like a business. And so the accounting for them is a little bit different, which you won't really see in the budget, but on the, if you look at the capper, you will definitely see the difference there. You get to page 149, you'll see that the overall fund is down about 30%. And a lot of that is due to the timing of capital projects. A lot of the projects in this fund are big. It's a very important fund. And we've, some projects were completed this year and budgeted this year. Other projects are next year and future years. So, we may have adjusted the timing of some of those. Again, due to the COVID uncertainties, we ultimately bumped out about $3 million of capital projects to future years. Okay, the first cost center, let's see, I'm sorry. Go on to page 150. Then you can see the breakout by category. So we have, as Al had kind of explained earlier, overall the picture is about 30% personal services, 30% operating, 30% capital. This one, because of the way we have adjusted the capital, you'll see 37% personal services, about 30% operating, and then 22% capital. Can the numbers match? And then debt service and reserves make up the remaining 11%. And then moving on to the revenues, this is probably where the greatest uncertainty lies. At this point in time, we're not sure how the businesses will recover. We hope they recover well. But this will have definitely an impact on the revenue we have coming into the water sewer system. We don't have any rate increases projected for next year, so the rate structure will remain steady, no changes. And then we do anticipate, again, the uncertainty, and we will adjust. We'll keep a close eye. We are keeping a close eye on the budget and the revenues coming in, and we will make adjustments later as we get better information. So this is definitely a concern of ours. Big part of the decline, may be, some of it's due to the appropriated reserve that we budgeted for the capital projects. But a lot of it, the revenue is extremely sensitive to the economic changes. So we're just keeping a close eye on this. We have some uncertainty, but we have to make sure we have the revenue to fund the projects.
I just had a quick question, Cindy, about the information that was circulated last week as it pertains to this year's budget for penalties and fees for shutoffs and such, and how it's affecting our budget this year. I don't necessarily want to discuss it in terms of this budget because I'm not thinking it will continue into next year, but I kind of wanted to bring that up and gauge when might be an appropriate time to discuss that information.
Well, I'm glad you brought it up. I wasn't going to bring it up here. I was going to wait till our next council meeting, actually.
Then there's me.
Well, I mean, we could have the discussion here. Look, I mean, we're not going to be able to go forever. It would have been my intention to sign an executive order to terminate the one that precludes shut off for non-payment until we had some of the issues pop up and the concerns expressed about the water bills. My intent would be to let that roll till the end of this month and then sign the order to have it terminate by the end of the following month.
I see. And then maybe deal with those particular case-by-case basis.
We're gonna have to deal with them case by case. I mean, it's never been an intent to walk away. Also, at the same timing, hoping that the Pinellas CARES Act, their new plan, that it be finalized, because they did waive the threshold that they set to
Qualify?
to qualify. They changed that, which means a lot more people will qualify. The hopes being is that those who maybe are impacted, all right, so here's all the moving parts. So we're hoping that I have been working with Oldsmar Cares to hopefully become one of the navigators for the program for the county, at least on the residential community side, the citizen side versus business side. The hopes is that we can work with them maybe, with permission from whoever our subscriber is for water service who has a large bill, to maybe help put them together to try to get a solution using some of that money. Because that money is going to go out, but they have quite a bit of it to put out.
Right.
And so to answer your question, that's kind of the thought process.
Thank you for that response. It's
Otherwise,
just
frankly, I would have tied it with some of the stuff that other people are doing right now, where they're taking that benefit away.
right, like TICO extended some of their grace periods through the end of July, and then
Right.
kind of moving back into, because it's a fine line to toe, assistance versus the ability to provide.
Yeah.
I mean, it's becoming a significant amount of money for the
Yeah.
county, for the city. It's something we need to talk about.
Well, I think the question is the timing of it and what other resources are there for
Available
the
for those
citizens.
people.
Because
Sure.
it's becoming a lot of money that probably would get paid for. It's revenue we'd lose either way.
Either way,
So,
yeah.
it kind of, to me, is, I'm not saying that there's no related expense that goes into producing that water and delivering it to them and so forth, but I would argue that from a revenue standpoint,
The zero-sum
it's a zero,
conversation.
yeah. So at least this way, there's a path to be able to say, we're going to end that, but Oldsmar Care is a navigator, and maybe you can work with them, so there's somewhere to send them to get that caught up. And hopefully, the county will have their ducks in a row on that. I know they're working hard on it, but so, there you have it.
I hope that works out.
Thank you, Mayor, for that
Tell me
information.
how that works out for
Well,
you.
I hope it works out.
It's a plan, anyway.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any questions?
I have a question, if I may.
Sure, go right ahead.
Okay, you touched on something that I was going to ask about the Pinellas CARES Act, so thank you for working on that. My other general question about that and about our deficits or our projected deficits, is there any movement on city and county and municipality help from the government or from the CARES Act or anything? Is there anything on the horizon where we might get some relief, where we can help some of these funds?
To answer your question, to the best of my knowledge, I know that within the Pinellas CARES money, they have asked, I don't know what the deadline was, but they have asked the cities to submit to them what losses we have incurred as a direct result of COVID-19. And what I will tell you, according to County Administrator Barry Burton, is that I think it's kind of like the cities will end up being at the end of the trough, seeing where they sit with taking care of local citizens and businesses and some other nonprofits, and also understanding the size of the problem as it relates to each city. because some cities, especially those who have beach communities, the amount of additional expense they've incurred is pretty staggering with overtime for like Clearwater Police and, St. Pete and that type of stuff. So I know that's being worked on. There is a trustee lunch with Congressman Bill Arakis that's coming up in early August. It's a question that I have for him. But I think at this point, probably the greatest opportunity would really be still with the county. And
I'm sorry, I missed that. Our greatest opportunity is what, Mr. Mayor?
I believe right now our greatest opportunity to recover funds that we've lost as a result of COVID-19 would be with the county.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Good to go.
Okay, all right, moving on. Get into the finance division. And again, they are basically the division that prepares this document, so. We're here. And there, we have no staffing changes for the finance division for next fiscal year. Moving on to page 155. Basically, there's overall the division is up 1.7%, and that's mostly because of the single audit requirements tied to the grants for our auditing services. And then also the communication services is up slightly, and that's just because of the allocation of the new phone system. The only thing that we really expect to revisit next year would be the bad debt expense, and that will kind of shake out once we know more about, the current situation and how we proceed with that, and how that falls in place. So that is likely to come back and be addressed again later in future budget revisions, but that is kind of what we have presented so far with what we know. Any questions for finance? Okay, moving on. The next one will be utilities maintenance. Okay, utilities maintenance I'll discuss page 159. That is the expenditure page. We don't have any, again, there's no personnel changes requested. Overall, this division is down about 20%, and that has to do with some of the capital projects, mostly operational efficiencies, and then some staffing changes that we've had. This is a division that's responsible for taking care of the electrical and mechanical needs of the city's utility systems, specifically the RO plant, the water reclamation facility, and the lift stations. Again, there's 4 FTEs in this cost center, and some of the equipment has been delayed that was requested, and you will see that in the department request to the city manager approved, but we are going to proceed with the lift station rehabilitation project, which is very important to maintain our lift station system. All right, any questions here? Okay, moving on, distribution and collection. These guys are responsible for all the piping of the city's utility system. They were recently came to the rescue when we had the big major water leak. They worked very hard to get that stabilized and get that the water service restored. We do not have any staffing changes projected for next fiscal year. Overall, the biggest project in this cost center will be the Harbor Palms water main replacement project. We have budgeted about $850,000. This will be for phase 2 of the project. Originally, we had, if you look at the department request to the city manager approved, you'll see a pretty big variance in improvements, and that's mostly for this project. We were I mentioned before, we were initially planning to proceed with phase 2 and phase 3, but we decided to kind of split them out until we knew more about the funding. This is appropriate because each of these phases does represent a specific economic benefit to the community and to the city. So we'll proceed with phase 2. Again, we'll know more about the pricing and the budget impact once we get the bid results back, which will be sometime next year. So overall, mostly due to the timing of the capital projects, this fund is down 50% or 56%. And one thing some of us may note, or some of you may notice, that in the goals on the previous pages may not necessarily reflect the capital. And this could be because either the project is in the design phase and other options, other things that would affect this would be, project that's been bumped out. So sometimes, the goals were created much earlier in the process and they were submitted probably back in February. And then we had to make some late changes and finalize the projects. We will address those and adjust that for the final budget process. Other projects in this fund would include the sewer line assessment project for $50,000, utility relocations, that is $150,000 planned for the additional utility relocation work from the Pinellas County Forest Lakes project. So we'll know more about that as we get closer to that as well. And then we also want to complete some GIS utility mapping to do some GIS outsource work for our utility system. So very important to know where all those underground things are located specifically. Okay, any questions on D&C? Okay, moving on to water reclamation facility. If you go to page 165. Some of the supplies here. Another instance of the Spirit is showing his face.
You're showing his face in there.
He's taking a bath, right?
There he is.
Wow.
Tough one to see on the actual printed version.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to see the print version, but you can, it's a little bit easier in the online version.
Whose idea was it to put that there?
And we will mix these up for the final, so.
It looks like he's swimming.
Barb is very proud of this.
That's nasty.
Staffing changes for this cost center as well. Moving on to the next pages, 166 and 167. The overall, the division is down about 18%. The major capital projects that we have put forth in this budget include the aeration system upgrades. And there was just a council agenda item in the last meeting where we kind of approved a design work on this in the initial work to make this happen. The main lift station replacement is also budgeted for, or the pump replacement is budgeted for $35,000, and that will be in the next year as well. There's another big change on here from the department request to the city manager approved will be the timing of the new control building. So that the design work is currently underway, and then we just looking at the timing of that program. It's not going away. We just made a better estimate on the timing, and it will be in the next fiscal year. So it's going to be phased in.
Okay.
Very important project, much needed. Any questions on WRF?
You answered my question. It was about the main control building, and based on some of the discussion we've had about the garage, once we get to October and we have a plan, then to permit and go through that entire process, it makes sense to put it out a year, although it feels initially kind of like a gut check, because that was really important to get that going.
Right.
But it's going. Thank you.
Another project that we will kind of be affected or be tied to that new development in the downtown area would be the filter number 4 capacity expansion. And we will be using or planning to use the sewer impact fees to fund that project. Okay.
I see that on there.
Okay, moving on to the reverse osmosis plant. You go to page 169. There's another little Spirit repair.
Ah, there he is. No, the other one.
Never know where he's
There
going
he
to
is.
show up.
Right there. That's a tricky one.
Okay, again, there's no personnel changes budgeted for this cost center. So moving on to the next page, overall, this cost center is down about 6%. And a lot of that's due to the timing of the capital projects. The operating budget always runs very tight in this division, and they do an excellent job preparing these budgets. The capital projects that we do have in here are replacement pipe service, pump number 1, upgrade for $50,000, and then a SCADA upgrade for $42,000. Any questions? Okay, the next cost center will be environmental management. On page 175, there's a big change year over year, and it's about 45% down. And this is due to the timing of the climate resiliency plan. We budgeted and have entered into a purchase order. That work is currently undergoing this fiscal year. It's just been announced that we will be receiving a grant for $75,000. So we will be taking that back to council, and you will see something more about that.
Wow.
Hopefully in the current fiscal year.
Great.
So that'll be coming up soon, but we did get the grant, so there'll be $75,000 grant and then $75,000 of additional expenses as well.
Perfect.
Exciting news. Okay, any questions here?
Wonderful.
You answered my question.
Okay, all right, moving along to the debt service. Okay, there are 3 current debt issues in the water sewer operating fund. One is for the water booster station, which is a big storage tank one of the biggest storage tanks next to the RO plant. This debt matures in 2022. The current balance at the end of 9/30/20 is going to be about $381,000. Overall, we have budgeted about $700,000 for the debt service for these 3 loans. The two SRF loans that are in effect that mature in 2032 were taken out to fund the construction of the water plant itself. The total outstanding debt for those 2 loans totals about $5 million.
This page contains the only typographical error that I could
Pardon me?
find. This page contains the only typographical error that I could find.
Well, I wasn't going to highlight that.
I didn't
but
see.
okay.
I didn't see any of the Ari Old's faces, but I saw the random letter B.
Not a mistake. It's slang. Outstanding, B.
It stands for debt.
Yeah, it's me talking to Mahoney. It's outstanding, B.
Okay. Anyway, moving on to reserves. Oh, wait. On page 178. It's a little surprise.
Oh, I
Another
see 'em.
appearance of the spirit.
There
A little easier to see. I think this is the final one for the,
You guys need more to do.
No, don't. They're having fun with what they do.
okay, the reserves, this is the money, kind of as Al was describing earlier about the general fund reserve. This functions the same way. Anything that's left over after paying all the current bills and is put into reserve that we will use to fund some of these future projects that we have delayed until.
That one's actually technically a little different because it has to be spent on either expanding or maintaining the capacity of the system. It's not like a just old contingency budget balancer. It functions like one, but it has a purpose to say, if you spend any of it, you have to spend it on expanding or maintaining the capacity of the system.
How flexible is the definition of expanding or maintaining the capacity of the system?
My ears are open.
Just checking.
Okay, so that is the end of the water sewer operating fund. The next fund is the water sewer impact fund, and this is also an enterprise fund. However, this fund is used to collect fees that we take in for water sewer impact fees based on new construction. So the next year, again, this has been a conservative approach. We're budgeting about $92,000 between the 2 fees, about $90,000 between the 2 fees that will be used for future projects. As I mentioned before, the filter projects that we have bumped out a couple years will be funded using these water sewer impact fees. And then we can use other expansion projects. And any questions?
Any questions? Nope.
Just that it was cut in half, I was just like, wow.
It's a guess.
Is it high?
It's based on construction.
high
Same
sensitivity?
restriction applies. What are the balances? One sewer is much higher or water?
$344,000 for water and $850 for
So
sewer.
it functions kind of like what the mayor was wanting to get to,
Yeah.
in that it's a funding source, has to be construction driven for us to use subsequently. And if you ever got seriously into the CAFR, you'd see that this disappears as well, because what we do at the year end is blend its balance sheet into 401.
Thank you.
Other questions? All right, move on.
Okay. This is the last fund I will be presenting, then we hand it back over to our city manager. This is a stormwater fund, so if you go to page 183, you can see there's 5 employees in this fund, and we are not scheduling or projecting any, or requesting any increases in the funding or the staffing. The next page is the revenue page. You will see that the revenue declines about 30%, and part of that's due to the timing of capital projects. New in this fund, you will see a $200,000 transfer from, it's a local infrastructure tax. And what we need this for is to help fund the Harbor Palms infrastructure debt, so the debt repayment. So that's why this has been presented in there as part of our plan. But again, that's for, you know, the council to provide guidance on. The revenue is essentially flat. The revenue in this fund is based on impervious surface of all the, you know, the residential and commercial properties. We are not scheduling, there's no rate increases scheduled, and there's no increases in the revenue projected. Overall, the expenses are down about 30%. Some of that is the timing of capital projects. The biggest change in this, or the biggest project in this fund will be the Harbor Palms stormwater system improvements for phase 2. Again, you'll see the difference between the department request and the city manager's approved. That is because we decided to bump out phase 3. And as we get closer to the bid time for phase 2, which will be next year, we'll be able to square up these numbers and finalize them. Right at this point, it's a guess, but we don't, it's our best estimate. Okay, also new in this fund is a principal payment on the debt, and that is because we are reaching the end of the construction draw period in March, and we will need to start making principal payments on it. Okay, overall, again, it's down 30%. And do you have any questions?
Questions?
Okay, with that, I will hand it back over to Al
solid
Braithwaite,
waste,
City Manager for solid waste.
We want to talk about solid waste fund, but essentially, I think the tough part we've already
Let me
covered.
interrupt you for a moment. I'm not sure how much more, because we're not doing the capital improvements, other than to ask a question. I don't know how much more you have, whether you want.
If we're not, this would be it with a follow-up for any of council's questions that I didn't address either through page numbers or anything else. So this would be it if we're not going to separately do anything on the CIP.
Okay, then go ahead. Otherwise, I was going to break for lunch. Do you want to break for 5 minutes? People want to grab a sandwich and sit back down?
I'd just as soon plow forward. I'm
right
trying to
ahead.
stay on my feet.
Good.
Okay.
If you plow anywhere, go forward, though.
So the solid waste fund, the reason I asked to take it back was in case we wanted to have any more conversation about the situation we find ourselves in. As you notice, it's actually up by 1%, but that's mostly because I'm proposing that $2.10 increase on the recycling charge, or a different way to say it is, I'm no longer showing the bill to residential customers as if we're paying it. It would be a separate charge. You know, your residential charge on the utility bill now says $18, includes recycling. It will now either say recycling, it will say solid waste 18, recycling 210, or it'll say $20.10 solid waste. I want to separate it so that we make it clear to the public that we're not making it part of the base charge. The creativity part is just, I want to get a head start on what's likely to be a much larger increase moving forward. We do have some alternatives, which I'd like to discuss at the workshop, about how to address that, because I've got an operating margin with what we pay Republic and what we charge the customers now. So we have a few alternatives, and I have initiated some preliminary conversations with Republic. We're not yet, obviously, if we go to bid, it'll be in the middle of next year for an October 1, 21 effective date. We could possibly extend the existing agreement for the 90th time. And I want to know, because there's a clause in the agreement that if I allow it, allows them to come to you and ask for an increase in the middle of the contract. Now, obviously, you know I've never allowed that, but I want to find out from them what they're thinking as to what they have to have, because obviously all of these rate increases in different categories affect them worse than us. That's their bread and butter and their livelihood. I want to see what they say they need before I decide. It could be a 10-minute conversation. If they come in and say, because I'll tell you what happened the first time, we met with their representative a year ago, and they wanted to, in mid-contract, increase the recycling charge to the same as the solid waste charge, which would be a 600% increase. So obviously that conversation was pretty short. Now, they are very, very excited about trying to keep our business because we've had a long-standing relationship. And I would maintain that for the most part, with some of the war stories I've heard and experienced in my prior life, they're pretty good. I mean, they're pretty responsive, and we have to get after them, but they generally respond. So what I'm trying to do right now, and I had hoped to have that first conversation before today, but I couldn't get together with them, is just kind of feel them out and say, all right, you guys, give me an idea of what you think you need the range of those fees to be, and then I'll tell you if we'll be willing to entertain negotiations for an extension to the existing contract as opposed to see you at the bid table. If we go to bid, I'm suggesting to you it'll be bad. And I, obviously, with COVID, maybe worse. I mean, they were actually pretty good, and we helped them out during COVID because we allowed them to stop picking up yard waste just to keep their guys off of having to touch it. And they appreciated that, although the timing of it got a little weird, and most people are saying, hey, they're still picking it up.
Right.
So it's kind of it's an ongoing thing, but I find them to be pretty responsive. So I'm gonna try and negotiate that to give you a better idea of what we're really looking at. But for now, I need a head start to the public, and I'll tell you, you know, for full disclosure, part of what I'm saying here is, okay, public, right now, we take single stream recycling and it's part of your fee whether you use it or not. Now, me personally, and this isn't mine to do, this is yours to approve, I would like it if the hauler provided us a rate that allowed the customer to decide if they wanted to use it.
Yeah, like an opt-in.
I've been forewarned by my buddies in the city management business that if I insist on that, nobody will bid on it. So I had what I thought was a brilliant idea, because then I could say, I'm removing the recycling charge now, public, sorry, if you want recycling, this is what it costs and you have to pay it. But if I could negotiate a deal where it might be $5, it might be $10, but you don't have to take it. If you don't want to pay for it, you don't have to have the service. I don't think I'm going to get that done, because I don't think they'll bid it or even quote it. But what they wanted was, it feeds their business model, which is hilarious to me. They wanted to make the recycling charge equal to the solid waste charge. Guess why? So that it would no longer matter whether they threw something that was recyclable into the regular trash. They wouldn't lose financially for that.
I haven't, by the way, on that subject real quick, how many people realize that glass right now, they're not doing anything with glass?
I only know, yeah.
It's depressing thinking about it.
Yeah, it is very depressing, but we kept separating glass, and it wasn't until we were in the midst of this pandemic and having conversations with them, and they're like, well, you know, we can't sell the glass anymore, so.
So all I was trying to do is lay that out. The fund is fairly easy to analyze. There are no capital assets in it. It's a contract relationship with the hauler. You see, there's not really much that needs to be talking about. The revenue rates are staying the same. The 30,000 increase in the residential side, we've analyzed is Bayside Terrace. They're now on the books full blast. So that gets us a little extra residential revenue for solid waste, but it's pretty flat. Remember, the commercial waste account is always going to kind of be a pass-through. Like our solid waste disposal fees, well, if they go up, probably means the commercial revenue's gone up, more than likely even higher. Because we pass through the tear, that 6%, the 37.50 now going to be 40, 45.50. That we don't pay that, we pass that along, we charge them for the pull. So if there's a lot of activity, there's more pulls, there's more expense, but there's more revenue. Residential should be pretty flat, pretty predictable. We should nail it fairly well. and then the recycling will become a separate revenue charge.
When you say ugly, you mean $2.10?
Councilmember Gannon, go ahead.
Sorry. When you say ugly, you mean $2.10 to potentially,
Yeah, do you have any early indicators?
or any,
The only indicator I had was a year ago, they wanted us to allow them to charge $12.68,
which is the 600%?
where it was $2.10.
Wow, okay.
So the reason I'm taking this approach is because if they're willing to negotiate something that I think is reasonable under the circumstances, I know it's going to be an increase, but we have a little room to play with on the margin. And maybe we go to once a week, maybe, there's a bunch of things you can do to mitigate the damage of the worst case scenario. But I have to have that conversation with them before we decide we'll see you next year's bid. I'm sure they'll bid. I mean, they want the business. They're desperate for the business. I personally think that Hillsborough County did a smart thing, not a popular thing, but a smart thing to go. They didn't say whether their haulers, they have a bid process that utilizes 3 haulers for all of Hillsborough County unincorporated. They didn't say whether anybody of those haulers was charging them more. They were instantly, first thing Bonnie Wise did now, she was the chief financial administrator before she was the county administrator, finance person, love her. And so she came right at it and said, we got to get ahead of this. And guess what happened? One of the 3 haulers, the hauler that benefited the most not benefited from the raise, but gets the most revenue, has the most accounts, upon that rate increase to the customer, gave them a letter saying they were temporarily not taking recycling anymore.
Well, and along that lines, you're suggesting that we make the increase specific to recycling, the 210?
Because that's what we pay the hauler for the recycling. Back when we started this, we were negotiating whether we wanted to do it in-house and take advantage of the spot markets, and I wouldn't have any part of it. Luckily, Bruce agreed. So we said, no, this is your problem. Because we did that years ago. We used to do it. We did it with Clearwater, and we had a good relationship with Clearwater because when the markets are normal, the volume helps. But Clearwater was such a big operation, we were making some decent money there. I didn't want to go into that.
Well, I would defer to you on this, quite honestly, but my only point would be if suddenly, I've sat in meetings at the mayor's council with presentations on solid waste, and there's some real questions about the viability of recycling. And if that's tagged as a recycling fee and suddenly recycling isn't there,
why am I
yet
being
we're
charged
still
for it?
getting hit on the other side of solid waste, I don't know that that's the smartest place to put it.
Well, if we don't do it, we're still paying them for 1 more year, and we're still getting paid for it. In other words, if we don't change anything, we're still getting essentially $210 out of our $18 to pay for it that way. I'm trying to do 2 things. I'm trying to get ahead of the fact that I think the increase is going to be a lot worse and we get a little piece of it done. And I'm trying to communicate we know how popular I am with the water customers. I want to communicate to
But
the
your
public.
newsletter is very nice.
Thank you. That's because of them. But I want to.
I'm really
make
glad
sure
they
that
know
we're-
who the city manager is during this water.
I just wanted to make sure they understood that there was a charge for recycling now. They just didn't see it. I want them to see it. So
Okay.
I was trying to do that both, but I'll do whatever council wants to do. And I say, we have a little room, depending on what I get done with Republic conversationally, we'll come at you with some alternatives to this that, there's some things we might be able to do. But if we do them now, does it make it worse down the road? So I'd like to see if an extension is even remotely possible before we go too far down that road. We'll survive. If you don't want to do an increase this year, we'll survive. The fund made a little money, we'll be okay. But I wanted to get ahead of it if that were possible.
All right, who has questions?
I have a
Hold
question.
on, anyone else?
I have
You.
commentary.
I have a question, Mr. Mayor.
All right, go ahead, Vice Mayor.
Okay, I appreciate that you commented on the mayor's council talking about this, and I have a question for you and then a comment. On the Resilience Coalition, there's been talk about Pinellas County taking over recycling. Have you heard anything on that front? Because we have not been meeting during COVID.
I have. I've heard that there is a lot of discussion, excuse me, a lot of discussion about it, and there is an interest, but it is probably in the future, and I don't know that most people feel the capital investment to make it happen, that it's something that's going to happen. I don't know that it's moved any. I've heard a lot of discussion about it, just not so sure that anything is going to happen on it.
Okay. I am looking forward to seeing the alternatives, Al, that you're talking about. And as an avid recycler, speaking for, some of us, I would not mind seeing that it's separate on the bill and that it costs more. So I'm looking forward to seeing what all of those alternatives are. And the last point, I heard you say something about glass, Mayor, something about glass.
Yeah.
But I didn't hear what you said.
That they're not recycling it.
Well, the reason on that is because glass, it can break down into sand. So there's not really that big of an environmental impact, and there's no market on the, on the secondary market for glass.
Yeah, no, I know the reason for it. I know the reason for it. I was just saying I wasn't sure if most people realize that.
Oh, okay. Well, I just thought that it was a little fun fact for people to realize that it's not as environmentally detrimental to throw glass into solid waste as opposed to glass into recycling. So,
very good.
But you guys all know this is something that I'm passionate about. But we also have to be conservative with our taxpayer dollars. So I look forward to the alternatives. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Saraki.
Thank you, Mayor. I would just like to say that I really think that Al's idea of the forward thinking of getting ahead of the game before this has to go to bid, I kind of like his strategy. And I would like to say that I kind of agree with putting the $2.10 fee onto the bill, but not call it recycling.
Okay.
That was my question.
Councilmember Saraki. Oh, Saraki, I'm staring right at Knapp.
Hey, that's okay.
Sorry.
He's my
Yes.
buddy.
Mr. Knapp.
Thank you. I agree, because I'm trying to think through the perspective of those that don't recycle. They're gonna see something, a recycling fee. Well, why am I paying for this? Because this would be for every account, correct, Al?
Yep, right now.
So, imagine all the questions that may arise from that. But to Councilmember Saraki's point, I think it's, even if we don't know the numbers right now, the sooner we can have any more of a refined picture to be out there and say, hey, public, be forewarned, there's something that's gonna be not so attractive that's coming your way. The more we can get out in front of that, I think is gonna just smooth whatever wave that does hit us. So that's what I'm thinking.
Very good. Councilmember Gannon.
Apologies for my talkativeness.
That's all right. That's all right.
Um,
It's all good. Good questions.
Councilmember Saraki, and you actually, I had a question for you, Mr. Mayor. Labeling it recycling, so there's not necessarily any opposition to the $2.10 issue. It's how do we label this to best
Right.
package it for acceptance? Because to Mr. Knapp's point, this is recycling. I don't recycle. Why am I getting charged for this? Or somebody saying, later on down the line, well, recycling isn't a thing anymore, so now we have this broken out piece that we can no longer collect on. But then I was unsure of how else we could label it, or if breaking it out is something we should do. Maybe we just lump it into the existing charge without breaking out the word recycling. I just kind of wanted to get a feel for that.
Well, my thoughts on that were just that. I think
Just the
that it makes
word.
sense that it's just an increase of $2.10 and that we don't charge for recycling. Because, it's what people are accustomed to. It is an increase, right? But it's an increase that hopefully gives us some leverage to maybe allow them, because I think part of the way that you'll end up leveraging a better contract or a better renewal rate, I should
Yes.
say, is by allowing them to come back early.
I agree.
Why I'm doing it.
And so,
Yeah.
because it makes sense. I mean, they can, they can mitigate some of the loss that I doubt that they're have a loss right now, but certainly a loss in margin now, with the hopes that our citizens don't get sticker shock later. Because there's no question, listen, our expenses have gone up, period. But this way, if there are some strangeness that happens with recycling, it's irrelevant to what we're charging. The other thing is to Councilmember Knapp's point and Shiraki's point of there are a lot of people who don't recycle, and now all of a sudden they're going to see that line item on their bill and go, wait, why am I being charged this? I don't recycle. I don't want to recycle. Whatever it just keeps it simple. We may hear a little bit about it, but it just costs more to
It just costs more,
cost
period.
more, man.
Last comment. I want to
Councilmember.
also mention what Al mentioned about Republic Services. I feel they do a fantastic job, and he is correct. If there is an issue, they take care of it right away. And I do like his idea of getting a head start on doing the bid process with them now before we go to bid. That's all I have, Mayor.
Very good. All right, any other questions, comments?
Food?
So I think that you've got a consensus from the council on the 210. Probably that it's not broken out, it's just an increase.
Would the council have any agita if I just made it $2? Just to
That's
maybe
fine.
$20 instead of $20.10?
The redhead.
I mean, if I'm not gonna break it out, I might as well.
I think you should make it 201.
You can make it 2020.
2001? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I don't think you should. Any objection to that?
No, because if, I
That-
mean.
that
it's
extra
That's
expensive.
fine, or $2 bucks is fine.
I was just thinking to myself, like, okay, well, why wouldn't you want to get that 10 cents? Well, okay, from a
I do, but the purpose of the whole thing is get a head start on whatever the increase is gonna be. Yeah, 10 cents might make a difference. But if I'm not gonna go after and tell people, this is what it
Exactly
costs
what-
us to recycle, sometimes the psyche of $20 is a lot easier to, it's like the
Yeah.
1999 instead
Yeah,
of the 20.
exactly. Well, and
$20
then
just sounds, okay, $20.
And then on the back end, if there are complaints, well, we're still eating 10 cents.
That's right. And, yeah, I think that's a good idea. We'll just take it out of the city manager's budget.
Yeah. Hey,
It was his idea.
It'll reduce it.
All right, any other discussion on that?
no.
All right, sir, what else you got?
If there's no other conversation to be had on the CIP, our presentation is completed. We thank you. Unless anybody wants to circle back on specific page numbers or things, we're done.
Does anybody have any specifics, anything on the capital improvement program? I think we covered it as we went through it. Vice Mayor, do you have anything?
No, I was just wondering if I could take a little break.
Yeah, well,
I have some questions, but they can be covered in a meeting with Al.
Okay.
So that I don't prolong this and, I'm not there, so I don't want to be a cog in the wheel.
All right. I
There, we had one
appreciate
other
it.
thing.
What's that?
We had one other thing. Look
All
at your
right,
screen.
let's go ahead. Do we have another face?
There he is.
What page is that on, son?
That is
187?
187.
187. Let me find it here. I was on 191, moving along.
Right in the O.
Oh, there he is.
Very nice. Very sneaky. All right, any other comments?
Katie?
Katie?
I promise, just this last one. I'm very much looking forward to a work session as far as the downtown and town center and a solid waste workshop. I just want to make that super clear that I'm hoping to see those dates come up on agenda.
Very good, very good. Anyone else? All right, let me just wrap things up. Let me thank our finance team and everybody, all the directors who
Can
are
we clap
involved.
now?
What's that?
Can we clap now?
We can clap
Come
now.
on.
Let me thank you all for your hard work on this. It's an outstanding document, great
It
information.
really is.
We know that you put a lot of passion into it, and it shows. So it does not go unappreciated. All right? All right. Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I have a motion from Knapp. I have a second from Gannon. Any discussion? Sensing you're ready to vote, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion,
Bye.
we're adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Great job.
Yes.